You have just woken up as a giant anaconda deep in the flooded forests of the Amazon. For the next 3 hours, you are going to experience silent hunts through murky waters, brutal battles with predators, and even the suffocating heat of the dry season, and this won't be easy, so good luck. But before we get into this journey of the anaconda, I'd appreciate it if you could subscribe, like the video, and why not leave a comment on where you are tuning in from and what animal you want me to cover next. Now let's begin this epic adventure together. The mist clings to the water like a second skin, and I feel it part around my massive form as I rise from the depths. 6 meters of muscle and sinew, I am the river's queen, and this is my morning ritual. The Orinoco backwater spreads before me like a mirror made of tea, reflecting nothing but the pale promise of dawn. I drape myself across the half-submerged Cecropia log that has been my throne for 3 seasons now. The bark is smooth beneath my belly scales, worn down by countless mornings just like this one. My body curves in a gentle S, 200 kilograms of living rope, seeking the perfect balance between warmth and watchfulness. The log creaks under my weight, a familiar sound that mingles with the gentle lap of water against deadfall. My core temperature reads the river's mood. Cold from the night's embrace, I need the sun's touch to awaken my blood. In these pre-dawn moments, I am slow, deliberate, every movement calculated to conserve the precious heat I've stored through the dark hours. My scales, each one a masterpiece of evolution, begin to drink in the first rays that pierce the canopy above. The air tastes of secrets. My forked tongue flickers out, sampling the morning's chemical symphony. There's the green sweet scent of water hyacinth blooming nearby, the earthy musk of capybara somewhere upriver, and underneath it all, the metallic tang that speaks of rain clouds gathering beyond the distant mountains. Each molecule tells a story, and I am fluent in this ancient language. Above me, the black vultures have already taken their positions. 3 of them perch on the mangrove branches, their wings spread wide to catch the same warming rays I seek. We are not friends, these scavengers and I, but we share an understanding. They know I am death made manifest, and they wait patiently for my leavings. Their dark eyes never leave me, and I appreciate their honesty. Unlike the chattering monkeys that fled at my approach, the vultures respect what I am. The water around my log is shallow here, perhaps 2 meters at its deepest. Perfect hunting depth, where large prey must surface to breathe, and smaller creatures cannot hide in the abyss. My body lies partially submerged, with only my back and the crown of my head breaking the surface. To any observer, I might appear to be just another piece of river debris, another fallen branch decorated with morning dew. But I am anything but debris. Every scale along my length is a sensor, reading the slightest vibration in the water. Every breath I take brings me intelligence about the world around me. My eyes, positioned high on my skull like twin periscopes, sweep the waterscape with the patience of millennia. I have perfected the art of looking like nothing while being everything. The sun climbs higher, and I feel the first real warmth seep into my bones. My metabolism begins its slow awakening, like an ancient engine finding its rhythm. Blood flows more freely through my massive heart, carrying oxygen and energy to muscles that could crush the life from almost any creature in this river system. Yet for now, I am content to simply exist, to feel the morning transform around me. A small caiman surfaces 30 meters downstream, its eyes breaking the water like amber beads. It sees me, recognizes what I am, and immediately submerges again, wise. We are both apex predators, but there is a hierarchy even among the river's elite, and my size places me firmly at its summit. The caiman will hunt elsewhere today, and we will both benefit from this mutual respect. The mist begins to lift as the sun strengthens, revealing more of my domain. This oxbow lake, carved from the main river's meandering centuries ago, is perhaps 500 meters long and half as wide. It is my territory, every submerged log and tangle of roots mapped in my memory. I know where the deep channels run, where the shallow bars collect unwary prey, where the current creates the perfect hunting blinds. Somewhere in the distance, a howler monkey begins its territorial call, a sound that carries across the water like distant thunder. The forest is waking up, and with it, the complex web of life that sustains us all. Birds will come to drink at the water's edge. Small mammals will venture down established trails to the shallows. Fish will rise to feed on insects knocked from overhanging branches. And I will be here, patient as stone, ready to capitalize on any opportunity. My nostrils flare, testing the warming air. The chemical signatures are growing stronger as the day progresses and prey animals begin their morning routines. I can detect the passage of a family of capybaras from an hour ago, their musky scent trail still lingering along the eastern bank. There's the sharp ammonia signature of bird droppings from the roosting colony of herons upstream. Even the subtle pheromone traces of fish spawning in the reed beds register in my ancient sensory apparatus. This is meditation and preparation combined, this morning ritual of mine. I am not simply waiting, I am becoming the river itself. My breathing slows to match the gentle rhythm of water against shore. My heartbeat synchronizes with the deeper pulse of the ecosystem around me. When the moment comes to strike, I will not be a separate entity hunting prey. I will be the river's own hunger made manifest, as natural and inevitable as the tide. The vultures shift on their perches, adjusting their positions as the sun changes angle. One spreads its wings fully, the black feathers creating a stark silhouette against the brightening sky. They know something I know too. Death is always near in the wild, always hovering at the edges of every life, but it is not an enemy to be feared. It is simply another player in the great game, another note in the endless symphony. As the mist finally clears completely, I settle deeper into my basking position. The morning hunt will come, but not yet. For now, there is only this: the warmth of sun on scales, the gentle motion of water, the chemical poetry of a waking ecosystem, and the perfect predatory patience that has kept my kind alive for 40 million years. The river remembers everything, and I am its memory made flesh. Perfume of prey olfactory hunt. The sun has warmed my blood enough. Time to hunt. I slide from my basking log with barely a ripple, my massive body entering the water like oil poured from a great height. The transition from air to water is seamless, practiced through countless repetitions. In moments, I am completely submerged, and the world transforms around me. Underwater, I am in my true element. The tea-colored water of the Orinoco system filters the sunlight into shifting patterns of amber and gold. Visibility is perhaps 3 meters on a good day, less when the rains stir up the sediment. But I do not hunt with my eyes down here. I hunt with senses far more ancient and reliable. My tongue flicks out, and immediately the water tells me its secrets. Every molecule that touches that forked appendage carries information, creating a 3-dimensional map of chemical trails that crisscross through my territory like invisible highways. The water itself has taste layers sweet near the surface where oxygen is plentiful, earthier in the depths where decomposition rules, metallic where underground springs add their mineral signatures to the mix. But it is the trace sense of life that truly interests me. Mammals leave the strongest signatures, their warm blood and rich oils creating persistent trails that can last for hours in still water. I taste the passage of a small deer that crossed at the shallows 2 hours ago, its hoofprints still visible as chemical footsteps in the water. There's the lingering essence of river otters that played here at dawn, their playful tumbling creating swirls of scent that spiral through the current like aquatic perfume. The capybara family I detected earlier has left the richest trail. These gentle giants, the world's largest rodents, spend much of their time in and around water, and their musky signature is unmistakable. I follow their scent trail upstream, my body undulating in the serpentine rhythm that has propelled my ancestors through these waters since before mammals walked the earth. My lateral line system awakens as I move through the water. These specialized organs, arranged along the length of my body, detect the slightest pressure changes in the water around me. Every creature that moves through this aquatic medium creates waves, disturbances in the liquid fabric of the river. A fish swimming 20 meters away registers as clear as a drumbeat. The gentle paddling of a turtle becomes a rhythmic pulse I can feel in my bones. But it is more than simple detection. These pressure waves tell me stories. The frantic flutter of a small fish speaks of panic, perhaps fleeing from a larger predator. The steady, powerful strokes of a caiman convey confidence and territorial intent. The irregular splashing from the surface suggests a wounded animal, vulnerable and potentially approachable. I pause at a junction where a smaller creek joins the main channel. The mixing waters create a complex chemical bouquet, and I spend several minutes reading the olfactory information like a sommelier evaluating a fine wine. The creek brings news from deeper in the forest, the passage of a tapir 3 days ago, still detectable as faint traces in the slow-moving water. There's jaguar sign too, the big cat having paused to drink at this very spot sometime during the night. The chemical trail of the capybara family grows stronger as I follow it upstream. My tongue samples the water every few seconds, each taste building a more detailed picture of my potential prey. 3 adults, I determine, and at least 2 juveniles. The adults show the chemical signature of animals in good health, full-bodied scents that speak of adequate nutrition and strong immune systems. The juveniles carry the slightly different chemistry of growing bodies, their metabolisms running faster and hotter than their parents. My movement through the water is utterly silent. 40 million years of evolution have perfected my swimming technique to near supernatural efficiency. My body moves in lateral undulations that match the natural rhythm of water itself, creating no unnecessary turbulence, no pressure waves that might alert potential prey to my presence. I am not swimming through the water. I am becoming the water, flowing with its currents and eddies as naturally as the river flows around obstacles. The bottom here is soft silt mixed with decomposing vegetation, decades of fallen leaves creating a rich organic layer that supports countless small lives. My belly scales read this substrate like braille, telling me of small channels carved by bottom-feeding fish, of the raised mounds where freshwater clams have established their colonies, of the deeper depressions where large animals have wallowed during the dry season. Above me, the surface of the water acts like a one-way mirror. I can see through it clearly when I position myself correctly, observing the world above, while remaining invisible to land-dwelling creatures. Occasionally, I glimpse the shadow of a bird passing overhead, or the ripples created by insects touching down on the surface film. Each of these surface disturbances creates pressure waves that my lateral line system detects and catalogues. The chemical trail leads me toward a bend in the river where a large strangler fig has toppled into the water, creating a complex habitat of submerged branches and root tangles. This is exactly the kind of location where capybaras like to feed, using the fallen tree as both protection and a platform from which to graze on aquatic vegetation. As I approach, I begin to detect fresher scent traces. The chemical signature grows richer, more complex, telling me that the capybara family spent considerable time here. I can distinguish individual animals now, the strong, dominant scent of the alpha male, the slightly different chemistry of the breeding female, the cleaner, simpler signatures of the juveniles who have not yet developed their full adult scent complexity. But there's something else in the chemical mix, something that makes my predatory instincts sharpen to needle focus. Fear pheromones. Recent ones. The capybaras detected a threat while they were here, their stress chemicals painting alarm across the water in invisible brushstrokes. Their departure was hurried, not the leisurely drift to a new feeding area that characterizes relaxed animals, but the urgent flight of creatures who sensed danger. That danger might have been me, my own passage through these waters earlier having left traces that their sensitive noses detected. Or it might have been something elsier caiman, a jaguar coming to drink, even the distant sound of human activity from the illegal fishing camps that sometimes appear along the river's edge. Regardless of what spooked them, the capybaras are gone from this immediate area. But their scent trail continues, and my chemical analysis suggests they haven't gone far. Stressed animals often make poor decisions, choosing concealment over distance, hiding in the first adequate shelter, rather than putting significant space between themselves and the perceived threat. I continue following their invisible highway through the water, my patience absolute. This is not the frantic chase of a wolf pack or the explosive charge of a big cat. This is the methodical approach of a creature that has learned to let time work in its favor. Every minute that passes, every meter I travel, brings me closer to the moment when opportunity and preparation will collide with perfect lethal efficiency. The hunt has begun in earnest, and the river holds its breath in anticipation. Silent coil ambush in murk. The scent trail grows stronger as I follow it deeper into the maze of flooded vegetation. Here, where the river has spread beyond its normal banks during the last flood season, a forest of water hyacinths has established itself. These floating gardens create a landscape of purple flowers and green leaves that extends as far as my chemical senses can detect, a perfect hunting ground for a predator of my particular talents. I position myself beneath this living ceiling, my body coiled in the ancient pattern that every anaconda knows by instinct. The main bulk of my length lies hidden in the murky depths, while just my eyes and nostrils break the surface between the thick clusters of hyacinth roots. To any observer above, I am invisible, just another shadow in the dappled underwater world. The water here is perhaps 4 meters deep, with a bottom of soft silt that has accumulated organic matter for decades. Decomposing plant material creates an almost black substrate that swallows light, while the root systems of the floating plants create a complex three-dimensional habitat where countless small creatures make their homes. Fish dart between the underwater stems like living jewels, their scales catching and reflecting what little sunlight penetrates this aquatic jungle. My breathing slows to the rhythm of deep meditation. Each inhalation draws in precious oxygen that my body will use sparingly in the coming hours. Each exhalation releases carbon dioxide into the water around my nostrils, barely disturbing the surface film. I can remain like this for 40 minutes or more, completely motionless, every system in my body running at minimal energy consumption while I wait for opportunity to present itself. The lateral line organs along my sides are now my primary sensory network. They detect the tiniest pressure changes in the water around me, creating a detailed picture of movement within a 30-meter radius. A school of small carakin fish swims past, their synchronized swimming creating pressure waves that feel like gentle music against my scales. Deeper, near the bottom, I sense the slow, deliberate movement of a large catfish prowling for bottom-dwelling prey. But it is the capybara family I am truly focused on. Their scent trail has led me here, to this floating meadow where they often come to feed on the tender shoots of young hyacinth plants. The chemical signature tells me they passed this way within the last hour, their distinctive musk still strong enough to follow even in the complex water chemistry of this plant-rich environment. My tongue samples the water every few minutes, building an increasingly detailed picture of my surroundings. I can taste the photosynthetic output of the plants above me, the sweet oxygen they release during daylight hours. I can detect the waste products of the small fish community, the territorial markings of river otters, even the faint chemical traces left by insects that have fallen into the water and drowned. Above the surface, I hear the gentle sounds of the floating garden ecosystem. Water droplets fall from leaves with soft plops that create tiny ripples. Insects buzz and click as they move from flower to flower. Somewhere in the distance, a great kiskadee calls from its perch on a partially submerged tree, the sound carrying clearly across the still water. Patience is more than a hunting strategy for me. It is a way of being. In a world where most predators rely on speed and aggression, I have perfected the art of becoming part of the environment itself. I am not hiding among the hyacinths. I am becoming one with them, another element in the complex ecosystem that potential prey will not recognize as dangerous until it is far too late. My muscles remain perfectly relaxed, ready to explode into action but showing no signs of the tension that might telegraph my intentions to sensitive prey animals. This is a balance that requires constant attention, loose enough to avoid fatigue, tight enough to respond with lightning speed when the moment arrives. My entire body is a coiled spring that feels like flowing water. The surface above me shifts as a small fish breaks through, probably chasing insects. The ripples spread outward in perfect concentric circles, and I track each wave as it passes through my sensory field. Everything in the water creates signatures, patterns that my ancient nervous system has evolved to read and interpret with supernatural precision. A new scent reaches me through the water-fresher capybara sign, mixed with the chemical indicators of animals that have been feeding recently. The rich, complex molecules that indicate recent plant consumption. These are not just traces left behind by the family I've been following. These are active feeding signs, suggesting that capybaras are currently in this area, probably very close to my position. I resist the urge to move, to actively search for my prey. That way lies failure. Movement creates pressure waves. disturbs the delicate balance of this aquatic environment, alerts every creature within sensing range that a predator is active. Instead, I refine my position slightly, adjusting my body's orientation by perhaps a degree to optimize my strike angle, should opportunity present itself. The floating garden continues its slow drift across the surface, carried by the gentle current that moves through this backwater. I move with it, my body maintaining its position relative to the plant mass, while the entire system travels slowly downstream. This passive movement is perfect camouflage, just another piece of debris caught in the vegetation's embrace. My heart rate has dropped to perhaps 8 beats per minute, a rhythm so slow that each pulse feels like a distant drum in the cathedral of my chest. My blood carries oxygen with miserly efficiency, every molecule conserved and utilized to maximum effect. This is the metabolic state that allows me to remain motionless for hours if necessary, burning calories at barely above the rate required for basic cellular maintenance. The light filtering down through the water begins to shift as clouds pass overhead, creating an ever-changing pattern of illumination and shadow. These changes help mask my presence, the dappled light making it even more difficult for prey animals to distinguish between living predator and inanimate debris. I have become a shadow among shadows, a possibility rather than a certainty. Time moves differently when you are a perfectly patient predator. Minutes flow like hours, but hours can flash by like seconds when you are truly focused on the eternal moment of preparation. I exist in a state between sleeping and waking, every sense alert but without the burning intensity that would exhaust my resources. This is the hunter's trance, the meditative state that turns waiting into a spiritual discipline. The water around me holds its breath, as if the entire ecosystem understands that something significant is building toward its inevitable conclusion. Even the small fish seem quieter, their movements more subdued. Perhaps they sense the predatory tension that radiates from my concealed form, or perhaps they are simply responding to some deeper rhythm of the river that speaks of life and death in equal measure. I am ready. Every coil of my body is positioned for maximum explosive power. Every nerve is calibrated to respond instantly to the first sign of opportunity. I have become the perfect ambush predator, a living trap disguised as part of the landscape itself. And somewhere in the green maze of floating vegetation above me, my prey moves closer to its appointment with destiny. Writhing dinner, constricting a capybara. The first vibration reaches me through the water like a prayer answered. Pressure waves, steady and rhythmic, coming from the surface approximately 15 meters to my northeast. The pattern is unmistakable, large mammal moving through shallow water, each step creating distinct pulses that my lateral line system reads like a heartbeat made visible. I remain absolutely motionless as the vibrations grow stronger. My chemical analysis of the water has been telling me for the last hour that capybaras were feeding nearby, but now I have mechanical confirmation. The rhythm of the movement, the pressure signature, the slight surface disturbance everything matches the profile of my preferred prey moving within striking distance. Through the tangle of hyacinth roots above me, I catch my first visual confirmation. A shadow blocks out part of the filtered sunlight, a dark mass perhaps 2 meters long moving slowly through the floating vegetation. My eyes, positioned on the top of my skull, track the shadow's progress while the rest of my body remains invisible in the murky depths. The capybara is feeding, moving from plant to plant with the unhurried pace of an animal that believes itself safe. I can hear the soft sounds of vegetation being cropped, the gentle splash as it moves from one feeding spot to another. Its confidence is understandable. Capybaras are excellent swimmers and rarely venture far from deep water that would allow them to escape most terrestrial predators. But I am not most predators. My body begins its slow repositioning, moving with infinite care to align myself for the perfect strike. The main coil of my length shifts perhaps half a meter, adjusting my angle without creating any pressure waves that might alert my prey. My head moves even more carefully, rising until my eyes break the surface film between the plant roots, giving me a clear view of my target. The capybara is magnificent, an adult male, probably weighing close to 60 kilograms, his coat a rich brown that glistens with water droplets. He feeds contentedly on the tender shoots of water hyacinth, his large teeth efficiently cropping the vegetation. His small ears twitch occasionally, monitoring for threats, but he shows no sign of detecting my presence. I wait until he moves to a feeding spot directly above the deepest part of my coiled body. The timing must be perfect too early, and he might escape to shallow water, where his superior mobility on land would give him an advantage. Too late, and he might move beyond my effective strike range. 40 million years of evolution have honed my instincts for exactly this moment. The strike, when it comes, is faster than conscious thought. My head erupts from the water like a biological missile, jaws opening wide to reveal the backward-curving teeth that will ensure my prey cannot escape once seized. The capybara has perhaps a tenth of a second to register the explosion of water and scales before my jaws clamp down on his hindquarters. His squeal of shock and terror pierces the afternoon air, a sound that sends every bird within a kilometer into panicked flight, but there is no escape now. My teeth have found their purchase in the muscle and hide of his haunches, and my body is already flowing upward through the water, coil after coil emerging from the depths to wrap around his struggling form. This is where my true power reveals itself. The capybara is strong, his muscles evolved for swimming and escaping from caimans, but no mammal can match the crushing power of a 6-meter anaconda. My body finds its rhythm, each coil wrapping around his torso with the precision of a master craftsman. I don't crush him immediately, that would be wasteful and potentially damage the meat. Instead, I apply just enough pressure to prevent him from inflating his lungs. The process is both violent and oddly gentle. Each time he exhales, I tighten my coils slightly, never allowing him to draw a full breath. His heart, beating frantically in panic, actually works against him, using up the oxygen in his blood faster than he can replenish it. His struggles gradually weaken as carbon dioxide builds up in his system and oxygen levels drop. His eyes, wide with the terror of a prey animal caught by a predator, begin to glaze as consciousness fades. I feel his pulse through my scales, a rapid drumbeat that gradually slows as his cardiovascular system begins to fail. There is no malice in what I do, no cruelty, only the ancient mechanism of survival that has sustained my kind since the age of dinosaurs. The water around us turns murky as our struggle stirs up silt from the bottom. The hyacinth plants part around our writhing forms, their purple flowers somehow still beautiful despite bearing witness to this primal drama. Other creatures have fled, the aerofish scatter to deeper water, turtles dive to the safety of submerged logs, even the insects fall silent. I feel his ribs beginning to yield under the steady pressure of my coils. The sound is barely audible, a series of soft pops as cartilage separates and bone cracks. His breathing becomes even more labored, each breath a tremendous effort that accomplishes less and less. His body temperature is already dropping slightly as shock sets in, and I can taste the stress hormones flooding his system through the chemical receptors in my mouth. The final moments are almost peaceful. His struggles cease, his body relaxes into the embrace of my coils, and his pulse becomes a faint flutter that gradually fades to stillness. The entire process has taken perhaps 8 minutes, from strike to death, efficient, effective, and far more humane than the prolonged chase and violent takedown employed by pack hunters. I maintain my grip for several more minutes, ensuring that life has completely departed. My body can sense the subtle changes that occur at the moment of death, the cessation of neural activity, the relaxation of muscle tension, the beginning of the chemical changes that mark the transition from living tissue to food. Only when I am completely certain do I begin to relax my coils. The capybara's body floats beside me in the disturbed water, a testament to both my hunting skill and the harsh realities of life in the river ecosystem. He was a healthy, mature male who might have lived for several more years and sired many offspring, but the river does not concern itself with might-have-beens. Here, in this floating garden of beauty and death, only the successful completion of the food cycle matters. I begin the delicate process of manipulating his body for swallowing, using my flexible skull and powerful throat muscles to position him head first for consumption. This meal will sustain me for weeks, perhaps months, depending on the hunting opportunities that present themselves. Every calorie he represents will be utilized with perfect efficiency, nothing wasted in the elegant economy of the predator's life. The river flows around us, carrying away the silt and debris of our encounter, already beginning the process of returning this place to its former tranquility. By tomorrow, the hyacinths will have closed ranks over the site of the struggle, and only the chemical traces in the water will remain to tell the story of what transpired here. But for now, there is only the satisfaction of a successful hunt and the prospect of the long, peaceful digestion that awaits me in the depths below. Beneath the green mirror, submerged digestion. The weight of my meal changes everything about how I move through the water. 60 kilograms of fresh meat creates a distinctive bulge along my length, a testament to both my hunting success and the remarkable elasticity of my body. My ribs have spread to accommodate the capybara's bulk, and my scales stretch taut over the expanded form. I am no longer the sleek predator of an hour ago. I am now a living storage unit, my body transformed into a mobile digestive chamber. I sink to the bottom of the channel, seeking the deepest, most secure location available. Here, 4 meters below the surface, the water is cooler and more stable, with less current to disturb my position. The soft silt bottom yields under my increased weight, creating a shallow depression that cradles my swollen form. This will be my resting place for the next several days as my body performs one of nature's most efficient digestive processes. My breathing rhythm changes to accommodate my new condition. The expanded bulk of my stomach creates pressure against my lungs, reducing their capacity and forcing me to breathe more frequently. Where I once could remain submerged for 40 minutes or more, I now must surface every 15 to 20 minutes to replenish my oxygen supply. Each journey to the surface is carefully planned. I rise slowly, minimizing energy expenditure, breaking only my nostrils through the surface film before sinking back to safety. The chemical signature in the water around me has changed as well. My body releases digestive enzymes and hormones that create a distinctive scent profile, marking me as a well-fed predator. This serves as both a warning to potential competitors and an advertisement to scavengers that scraps might eventually become available. Already, I can detect the increased activity of small fish in the area, drawn by the chemical promise of future feeding opportunities. My metabolism has shifted into a specialized state designed for maximum digestive efficiency. My heart rate slows even further, conserving energy for the massive task of breaking down and absorbing my meal. Blood flow redirects toward my digestive tract, where specialized cells begin producing the powerful acids and enzymes necessary to dissolve bone, muscle, and hide with equal effectiveness. The process begins slowly, with the production of gastric juices that have a pH more acidic than battery acid. These chemicals begin their work on the softer tissues. First organs, muscle, and connective tissue yield readily to the digestive assault. My stomach lining, protected by a thick layer of mucus, remains impervious to acids that would dissolve metal given enough time. Within the first 12 hours, I can feel the initial stages of digestion beginning. The capybara's body temperature has equalized with my own, and the first chemical breakdown has begun. My stomach walls contract rhythmically, mixing the digestive juices with the prey and ensuring that every surface is exposed to the powerful chemicals. The process is not visible from the outside, but I can sense it through internal feedback systems more sophisticated than any external monitoring could provide. The bones present the greatest challenge, but my digestive system has evolved specifically to handle large, calcified structures. Specialized acids attack the calcium carbonate matrix of the skeleton, slowly but relentlessly dissolving even the largest bones. The capybara's skull, which seemed so solid and permanent in life, will be reduced to dissolved minerals within a week. His massive molars, designed to grind tough vegetation throughout a lifetime of feeding, will become nothing more than calcium and phosphorus absorbed into my bloodstream. My position on the river bottom is strategic in multiple ways. The depth provides protection from surface predators and human activity, while the soft substrate allows me to partially bury myself if additional concealment becomes necessary. The current here is minimal, reducing the energy I must expend to maintain position. Small fish and crustaceans investigate my motionless form with curiosity rather than fear. I am temporarily beyond the concerns of hunting, focused entirely on the internal process of nutrient extraction. The vulnerability of this period cannot be overstated. A well-fed anaconda is slower, less maneuverable, and potentially unable to defend itself effectively against determined attackers. Jaguars, in particular, have been known to attack anacondas during the post-feeding period when we are at our most vulnerable. My choice of resting location reflects this awareness. I have positioned myself where approach routes are limited and escape paths remain available despite my reduced mobility. As the days pass, I monitor the progress of digestion through internal sensations that defy easy description. The gradual reduction in bulk as tissues are broken down and absorbed, the changing chemistry of my blood as nutrients flood my system, the rhythmic contractions of my stomach as it continues its relentless work. Each phase of the process follows ancient patterns encoded in my DNA, refined through millions of years of evolutionary pressure. Small scavengers begin to gather around my resting place, drawn by the chemical signatures of digestion. Catfish probe the silt near my body, searching for any organic matter that might have escaped my digestive tract. Freshwater shrimp pick over the disturbed sediment, finding microscopic morsels in the debris. Even these tiny interactions are part of the larger nutrient cycle, ensuring that nothing edible goes to waste in the river's economy. My buoyancy shifts as digestion progresses. Initially, the gas-filled organs of my prey made my body more buoyant, requiring effort to maintain position on the bottom. As these gases are absorbed or expelled and the solid tissues are broken down, I become denser, settling more firmly into my chosen resting spot. My body naturally adjusts for these changes, maintaining the perfect equilibrium that keeps me comfortable and secure. The psychological aspects of this period are as important as the physical ones. I enter a state of deep relaxation, my mind settling into the rhythms of digestion and absorption. This is not sleep, but rather a trance-like condition that conserves mental energy while remaining alert to potential threats. Time moves differently during these period showers can feel like minutes, while the completion of major digestive milestones creates punctuation marks in the flowing stream of consciousness. By the end of the first week, the transformation is remarkable. What began as a recognizable capybara has become an undifferentiated mass of partially digested tissue swimming in powerful acids. The distinctive smell of the animal has been replaced by the complex chemistry of advanced digestion. Even the animal's individual identity has been dissolved into the universal building blocks of protein, fat, and minerals that will become part of my own body. The river continues its eternal flow above and around me, carrying away the scattered evidence of my feeding and bringing new scents and chemical signatures from upstream. Life continues in all its forms, but for me, these days belong entirely to the ancient ritual of transformation, the conversion of one life into the energy and substance needed to sustain another. In the green-tinted depths of my digestive sanctuary, I am both participant and witness to one of nature's most fundamental processes, the elegant cycle that has sustained predators and prey since the beginning of life itself. Storms from the west, high waters rise. The first sign of change comes as a shift in the water's chemistry. New molecules arrive on the current, carrying the scent of distant mountains and highland forests. Rain has begun falling in the Andes, hundreds of kilometers upstream, and the river knows this long before any cloud appears in the local sky. My chemical sensors detect the subtle changes in mineral content, the increase in organic particles, the faint traces of highland vegetation that speak of vast watersheds awakening to the wet season. I have been resting in my digestive stupor for 8 days now, the capybara reduced to a manageable mass in my stomach, when the first real evidence of the coming flood reaches my sanctuary. The water level rises imperceptibly at first, perhaps a centimeter in an hour, but my body reads this change like a barometer reads atmospheric pressure. The current strengthens slightly, bringing new temperatures and chemical signatures from the swollen tributaries that feed this great river system. My resting place, carefully chosen for its depth and stability, begins to feel different as the water around me takes on new characteristics. The temperature drops several degrees as mountain runoff mixes with the warmer water of the lowlands. The usual chemical gradients that help me navigate my territory blur and shift as massive volumes of highland water reshape the familiar patterns of my domain. Within 12 hours, the change is undeniable. What began as a gentle rise becomes a steady surge that lifts the floating gardens of hyacinth and sends them drifting downstream like purple-flowered islands. The water that was once tea-colored with tannins from decomposing leaves now carries the grey-brown suspension of highland sediment, reducing visibility even further and changing the entire character of my underwater world. I feel the pull of the strengthening current against my body and make the decision to move to higher ground before the flood reaches its peak. My digestion is far enough along that I can travel safely, though I remain heavy and somewhat sluggish compared to my normal hunting condition. Using the increased current to my advantage, I allow myself to be carried downstream while steering toward the elevated areas where large trees create islands of stability in the rising water. The transformation of the landscape is remarkable to witness. Areas that were dry land just days ago now lie beneath several meters of rushing water. Trees that stood on firm ground now appear to be growing directly from the river's surface, their trunks disappearing into the brown depths. The familiar geography of my territory has been redrawn by the flood, creating new hunting opportunities and eliminating others. Fish behavior changes dramatically with the rising water. Species that normally inhabit different levels of the river column now find themselves in an expanded aquatic environment that reaches deep into the surrounding forest. Schools of caracins, normally confined to open water, now swim among the submerged branches of rubber trees and cecropia. Catfish that once hugged the bottom of defined channels now patrol the flooded forest floor, hunting among the leaf litter of what was recently dry land. The sound of the flood is unlike anything else in the natural world. Above the surface, the rushing water creates a constant whisper as it flows around newly submerged obstacles. Below the surface, the flood speaks in deeper tones: the groaning of stressed tree trunks, the grinding of sediment rolling along the bottom, the hollow booming of air escaping from flooded cavities. These sounds create an acoustic landscape that both masks and reveals the movements of potential prey. My hunting strategy must adapt to these new conditions. The reliable ambush spots I knew during normal water levels now lie far beneath the surface, their value as hunting grounds eliminated by the changed topography. Instead, I must learn to hunt in this three-dimensional forest environment, where prey animals move not just along predictable shorelines but through multiple levels of the flooded canopy. The most remarkable aspect of the flood is how it brings together creatures that would never normally interact. I observe a small caiman pursuing fish among the branches of a fig tree that last week stood 20 meters from the nearest water. A river dolphin surfaces between the trunks of a mahogany grove, its breathing hole appearing impossibly out of place in what the mind insists should be a terrestrial environment. The chemical landscape of the floodwater tells stories of the vast drainage basin that feeds this system. I taste minerals from highland springs, organic compounds from cloud forest streams. Even traces of snow melt from peaks so distant they exist in a completely different climate zone. Each molecule carries information about the massive scale of the hydrological system, of which this humble backwater is just one small part. Prey opportunities multiply with the rising water. Terrestrial animals caught off guard by the speed of the flood find themselves swimming rather than walking. Their unfamiliarity with aquatic locomotion makes them vulnerable to predators like myself, who are perfectly adapted to this environment. I detect the scent trails of deer that attempted to cross the flooded area, tapirs forced to swim between forest patches, even the rare jaguar that miscalculated the timing of its territorial patrol. The floating debris fields created by the flood provide both hunting opportunities and navigation challenges. Entire trees, uprooted by the torrential rains in the mountains, drift downstream like massive battering rams. Tangles of vegetation create temporary islands that shift and dissolve as the current redistributes them. Among this debris hide countless small creatures seeking refuge from the flood and making themselves available to any predator clever enough to hunt in these dynamic conditions. My position in the flooded forest gives me a perspective on the flood's ecology that few creatures can appreciate. From my vantage point beneath the surface, I can observe the complex interactions between aquatic and terrestrial life forms suddenly forced to share the same space. Birds that normally nest in high canopy branches now find themselves just meters above swimming predators. Fish accustomed to open water must navigate through dense networks of branches and vines. The oxygen content of the floodwater fluctuates dramatically as organic matter decomposes and photosynthetic organisms struggle to establish themselves in the murky conditions. I must surface more frequently during this period, both because of my continued digestive burden and because of the reduced oxygen availability. Each breath brings me information about the changing conditions above the surface, where the normal bird and insect communities are adapting to their radically altered habitat. As the water continues to rise, reaching levels that transform my entire territory into an aquatic environment, I realize that this flood represents both challenge and opportunity. The familiar landmarks of my hunting grounds may be submerged, but new possibilities emerge with each meter of rising water. This is the dynamic environment that shaped my ancestors, the periodic restructuring of habitat that keeps apex predators like myself adaptable and resilient. The flood is nature's great equalizer, reducing the advantages of terrestrial prey while expanding the domain of aquatic predators. In this temporarily transformed landscape, I am not just a visitor to the forest, I am its new apex predator, ruler of a realm where trees grow from water, and the rules of engagement have been rewritten by the awesome power of the rising river. Night Patrol Lunar Navigations. Under the waning gibbous moon, the flooded forest becomes a cathedral of silver and shadow. The lunar light penetrates the water in shafts that illuminate the submerged landscape like nature's own stained glass windows. I move through this underwater realm with the confidence of a creature perfectly adapted to nocturnal hunting, my body undulating between the drowned tree trunks with supernatural grace. The darkness holds no terror for me. My heat-sensing pits detect the warm-blooded signatures of potential prey with precision that rivals any technological instrument. Every mammal, every bird roosting too close to the water's surface registers as a glowing beacon in my sensory awareness. The cooler water creates perfect contrast, making the thermal signatures of living creatures stand out like stars against the night sky. My tongue works constantly in this nocturnal environment, sampling the water for chemical information that builds a three-dimensional map of everything around me. The flood has created new scent trails and disrupted old ones, but the basic chemistry of life remains constant: fear pheromones from stressed animals, territorial markings from creatures adapting to the changed landscape, the sweet chemical signature of flowering plants now blooming underwater in the strange new ecosystem created by the flood. I navigate by landmarks visible only to my specialized senses: the distinctive thermal signature of a large Cecropia trunk, its living tissue radiating stored heat from the day's solar absorption; the chemical plume from a colony of roosting bats, their droppings creating a distinctive olfactory beacon in the water below their perch; the electromagnetic signatures of swimming fish, their nervous systems generating minute electrical fields that my body can detect at surprising distances. The nocturnal soundscape of the flooded forest is unlike anything experienced during normal water levels. The usual chorus of frogs and insects has been replaced by the sounds of displacement and adaptation. Somewhere in the canopy above, a group of howler monkeys calls with unusual urgency, their normal territorial boundaries erased by the rising water. The splash of a large fish jumping creates ripples that travel through both water and air, reaching my sensory organs as overlapping waves of information. My hunting strategy tonight focuses on the edges where the flood meets still dry land. These marginal areas concentrate prey animals forced to cluster in the shrinking patches of terrestrial habitat. The chemical signatures in the water tell me that several species of small mammals have been feeding at the water's edge, probably driven by thirst and the need to access the aquatic plants that now grow where their normal food sources once stood. A three-toed sloth hangs motionless in a Cecropia branch barely 2 meters above the water's surface. Its naturally slow metabolism makes it nearly invisible to thermal detection, but my chemical senses identify it clearly. The sloth represents an easy meal, but one that would require me to partially emerge from my preferred aquatic medium. I file this information away for future reference, while continuing my patrol through the deeper areas where my advantages are absolute. The moonlight creates an optical illusion that could confuse a less experienced predator. The reflection of trees on the water's surface creates a mirror world that seems to extend infinitely downward. But my sensory systems cut through this visual trickery, relying on chemical gradients and pressure wave detection to build an accurate picture of my three-dimensional environment. Schools of small fish move through the flooded forest like living clouds, their synchronized swimming creating complex pressure waves that I feel as rhythmic pulses against my lateral line organs. These fish have adapted quickly to their expanded habitat, taking advantage of the new feeding opportunities created by the flood. But their very success makes them attractive to larger predators, and their movements in turn attract the attention of prey species I might be interested in. A night heron stands motionless on what appears to be a small island, but is actually the crown of a submerged shrub. The bird's hunting posture is perfect, its neck coiled like a spring ready to strike at fish swimming through the illuminated water below. But the heron's position also makes it vulnerable to attack from below, and I mentally calculate the angles required for a successful strike should the opportunity present itself. The water temperature varies noticeably throughout the flooded area, creating thermal layers that affect both my buoyancy and my hunting efficiency. Cooler water from mountain streams creates distinct channels that flow through the warmer lowland water, like underwater rivers. These thermal boundaries often concentrate prey species, as fish seek their preferred temperature ranges, and the chemical gradients they create attract various forms of aquatic life. My chemical analysis of the water reveals the stress signatures of mammals forced to swim longer distances than they prefer. The elevated cortisol levels in their urine and the heightened pheromone production of frightened animals create an olfactory landscape rich with hunting opportunities. I follow these chemical trails through the maze of submerged vegetation, my body reading the water like a tracking hound reads a scent trail on land. Phosphorescent fungi, now partially submerged and stressed by the unusual conditions, create an eerie biological lighting system along the waterline. These natural lanterns pulse with a greenish glow that would be beautiful if it weren't also serving as a navigation aid for a creature like myself. The fungi's light reveals the movement of small fish and aquatic invertebrates, creating a living constellation that helps me track the base of the food web that ultimately supports my predatory lifestyle. A family of river otters plays in the distance, their sleek forms moving through the water with an efficiency that I can appreciate, even as I recognize them as potential competition for fish resources. Their playful tumbling creates distinctive pressure waves and chemical signatures that I monitor carefully. While not large enough to be worthwhile prey for a snake of my size, their presence indicates healthy fish populations in this area. The moon's reflection on the water creates a highway of silver light that stretches across the flooded landscape. Small creatures are instinctively drawn to this illumination, creating hunting opportunities for predators adapted to use such natural light concentrations. I position myself along the edges of this lunar pathway, where the contrast between light and shadow provides perfect camouflage for an ambush predator. As the night deepens and the moon begins its descent toward the horizon, I continue my methodical patrol through the transformed landscape. Each stroke of my powerful body through the water brings new sensory information, new opportunities, new insights into the complex ecosystem that emerges when terrestrial and aquatic environments merge under the influence of floodwaters. The night belongs to hunters like myself, creatures that can navigate by senses evolved over millions of years to read the subtle signatures of life in an aquatic environment. In this moonlit cathedral of water and trees, I am both predator and priest, conducting ancient rituals of survival in a temple that exists only during the brief time when the river claims the forest as its own. Whispers of Cayman River rivalry. The first contact comes as a subtle shift in the water's pressure waves, a disturbance that speaks of something large moving with deliberate stealth through the flooded forest. My lateral line organs identify the signature, immediately, Cayman, probably 5 feet in length, swimming with the patient confidence of another apex predator. The rhythm of its movement suggests a mature animal, one that has survived long enough to develop the calculated hunting style that marks successful predators in this environment. I halt my own forward motion, allowing my body to drift naturally with the current while I assess this potential rival. Caimans and anacondas share these waters with a mutual respect born of evolutionary wisdom. Neither species is the natural prey of the other, yet both occupy similar ecological niches as large aquatic predators. Our interactions follow unwritten rules developed over millions of years of coexistence. The caiman surfaces 30 meters away, its eyes and nostrils breaking the water's surface with barely a ripple. In the moonlight, those amber eyes reflect like jewels, scanning the area with the methodical attention of a creature that has learned to evaluate every situation before committing to action. Its body position suggests awareness of my presence. Caimans possess excellent sensory systems and would have detected my chemical signature in the water long before visual contact became possible. This particular individual shows the scars of a successful life in these waters. A pale line across its snout speaks of an encounter with another caiman during territorial disputes. Missing scales along its flank tell of battles fought and survived, possibly with jaguars or perhaps with others of its own kind. These marks of experience make it a more formidable opponent, but also suggest an animal wise enough to avoid unnecessary confrontations. The standoff develops according to ancient protocols. Neither of us moves aggressively, yet both maintain positioning that would allow for rapid response if circumstances change. I adjust my body angle slightly, ensuring that my head remains oriented toward the caiman, while keeping my powerful tail positioned for maximum striking leverage. The caiman mirrors this behavior, its body forming a gentle S-curve that speaks of readiness without overt threat. Our chemical communication begins immediately. I release subtle pheromone markers that identify me as a large, healthy female anaconda in no particular mood for territorial disputes. The caiman responds with its own chemical signature, a complex mixture of hormones and pheromones that speak of mature male confidence tempered by respect for a potential adversary of my size and reputation. The water around us carries these chemical messages like a slow-motion conversation. My tongue flicks out regularly, tasting the caiman's stress levels, reading its emotional state through the complex chemistry of interspecies communication. Its cortisol levels remain elevated but stable, suggesting alertness rather than panic. Its territorial marking pheromones maintain steady concentrations, indicating confidence in its right to be here, but willingness to negotiate boundaries. A school of small fish passes between us, their synchronized swimming creating pressure waves that both predators read and analyze. The fish show no particular alarm at either of our presences, a sign that neither caiman nor anaconda is actively hunting at this moment. This mutual restraint helps maintain the delicate balance that allows two apex predators to share the same hunting grounds without constant conflict. The caiman begins a slow circulation pattern that maintains distance while asserting its territorial claims. Its movement is neither retreat nor approach, but rather a demonstration of ownership that respects my presence while declining to yield completely. I respond with my own positional adjustment, a sinuous glide that maintains visual contact while indicating my intention to continue hunting in this area. Minutes pass in this aquatic chess match, each move calculated to avoid triggering aggressive responses while maintaining dignity and territorial rights. The caiman's tail creates subtle current patterns that my body reads like semaphore signals. My own movements generate pressure waves that communicate size, strength, and confidence to my reptilian colleague. We are writing a treaty in the language of hydrodynamics and body positioning. The chemical analysis continues throughout our encounter. I can taste the caiman's recent feeding, success the digestive enzymes, and partially processed nutrients that speak of a meal taken within the last day. This information suggests a well-fed predator, one less likely to engage in risky territorial disputes over hunting grounds. A hungry caiman might be more aggressive, more willing to challenge my presence in what it considers prime territory. The environmental conditions favor peaceful resolution of our territorial negotiation. The flood has expanded hunting opportunities exponentially, reducing competition for the limited ambush sites that exist during normal water levels. With prey animals scattered throughout the vastly expanded aquatic environment, there is little reason for established predators to engage in potentially costly conflicts over specific hunting locations. A sudden disturbance in the water draws both our attentions toward a common stimulus. Something large has entered the water perhaps 50 meters upstream. The pressure waves and chemical signature suggest a deer that has chosen to swim across the flooded area rather than attempt the longer journey around it. Both caiman and anaconda recognize the opportunity, but our relative positions and hunting styles will determine which predator has the better chance of success. The caiman's eyes track the disturbance with predatory interest. but its position relative to the swimming deer is less than optimal. Caimans are ambush predators like myself, but they rely more heavily on explosive speed over short distances rather than the methodical positioning and patient approach that characterizes anaconda hunting strategy. The deer's current path will bring it closer to my position, giving me a significant tactical advantage. Recognition of this reality shifts the dynamic between us. The caiman's body language changes subtly, indicating acceptance of my superior positioning for this particular hunting opportunity. Rather than attempt to interfere with my hunt or compete directly for the prey, it maintains its position and settles into an observational mode. This behavior demonstrates the sophisticated understanding of hunting etiquette that allows multiple apex predators to coexist successfully. I begin my approach toward the swimming deer, moving with the slow inevitability that characterizes successful anaconda hunts. The caiman watches with what might be professional interest, perhaps evaluating my technique or simply observing the hunting behavior of a fellow apex predator. There is no jealousy in this observation, no sense of challenge or threat, simply the recognition that different predators have different specializations and that success for one does not necessarily mean failure for another. The deer's path through the water creates increasingly strong chemical and pressure signatures as it approaches. My body coils into the perfect striking position while the caiman maintains its respectful distance, neither hindering nor assisting, but simply acknowledging the professional courtesy that governs such encounters between established predators. As I prepare for the strike that will end this particular hunt, I am aware of the caiman's continued presence as both witness and colleague in the ancient business of survival. We are rivals in the sense that we compete for similar resources, but we are also partners in maintaining the delicate balance that keeps this ecosystem functioning according to the rules written by millions of years of evolutionary refinement. The whispered conversation between two apex predators continues in the chemical language of the water, a dialogue of mutual respect that will outlast this particular encounter and shape future interactions between our species in the complex social ecosystem of the flooded forest. Duel with the jaguar survival test. The dry season has concentrated all life around the shrinking pools and channels that remain of the once vast flooded forest. What was an aquatic paradise just months ago has contracted into a series of isolated lagoons connected by narrow streams barely deep enough for my passage. The abundance of the flood season has given way to fierce competition for dwindling resources, and nowhere is this more evident than in the predator community. I have claimed a prime oxbow lake as my territory, a kidney-shaped body of water perhaps 200 meters long and half as wide. The deepest sections still hold 3 meters of water, enough for comfortable maneuvering, while the shallows provide excellent hunting opportunities as prey animals are forced to concentrate around the remaining water sources. This lagoon represents survival itself in the harsh arithmetic of the dry season. But I am not the only apex predator who recognizes the value of this oasis. For 3 days now, I have detected the presence of a large jaguar in the surrounding area. Its scent marks on trees at the water's edge speak of a mature male, probably weighing close to 100 kilograms, marking territory with the confidence of an animal accustomed to dominance. Our paths have been converging inevitably toward this confrontation. The jaguar's hunting schedule has brought it into direct conflict with my own territorial claims. Its tracks in the mud show that it has been coming to drink at dawn and dusk, precisely the times when my own hunting is most active. Worse, its presence has scattered the prey animals that normally frequent this area, forcing them to seek water at more dangerous times and locations rather than risk encountering either of us during our prime hunting hours. The confrontation begins at sunset on a day when the heat has driven every creature to seek relief at the water's edge. I surface near the eastern shore of the lagoon to breathe, my head breaking the surface between a stand of cattails that provides perfect concealment. The movement that catches my attention is subtly a shift in the shadows beneath an overhanging strangler fig that could be wind moving the branches, but my predatory instincts recognize it immediately as something far more significant. Golden eyes materialize in the green shadows, reflecting the last rays of sunlight with an intensity that speaks of supreme predatory confidence. The jaguar emerges from concealment with the fluid grace of a creature perfectly adapted to its environment, its spotted coat blending seamlessly with the dappled light and shadow of the waterside vegetation. This is no ordinary Caith size and bearing mark it as a dominant male in its prime, an animal that has never known defeat in territorial disputes. Our initial assessment of each other follows the careful protocols of apex predator encounters. Neither moves aggressively, yet both position themselves for optimal response to any change in the situation. The jaguar settles into a crouch at the water's edge, its powerful hindquarters coiled like springs, massive paws positioned for either explosive forward motion or quick retreat. Its eyes never leave mine, reading my body language with the expertise of a creature whose survival depends on accurately assessing potential threats. I adjust my position slowly, bringing more of my length into striking range while maintaining the appearance of casual movement. My head rises slightly higher above the surface, displaying my size while keeping my most vulnerable areas protected by the water. The chemical communication begins immediately, pheromones and stress indicators flowing between us in the ancient language of interspecies negotiation. The jaguar's scent profile tells me everything I need to know about my opponent. This is a healthy, well-fed predator in its territorial prime. The low cortisol levels indicate confidence rather than desperation, suggesting an animal that views this encounter as a matter of establishing dominance rather than fighting for survival. Its territorial marking hormones remain steady, speaking of an established territory holder rather than a wandering subordinate seeking new hunting grounds. Minutes pass in this careful evaluation period, each predator reading the other's intentions and capabilities. The jaguar's breathing remains controlled, its heart rate elevated but stable, the physiological signature of a predator, prepared for action but not yet committed to violence. Its pupils dilate slightly as the light fades, activating the enhanced night vision that makes cats such formidable nocturnal hunters. The jaguar makes the first decisive move, rising from its crouch and padding slowly along the water's edge. Its movement is neither retreat nor advance, but rather a demonstration of territorial ownership that challenges my right to occupy this prime hunting location. Each step is placed with deliberate precision, the cat's weight distributed perfectly to avoid creating vibrations that might telegraph its intentions. I respond with a movement of my own, sliding forward through the water until my massive head emerges fully from the cattails. The display of my size is calculated at 6 meters in length, and weighing over 200 kilograms, I outmass even this impressive jaguar by a considerable margin. But mass alone does not determine the outcome of such encounters, and both predators understand the complex calculations involved in these territorial negotiations. The jaguar pauses 20 meters away, its position offering multiple escape routes while maintaining visual contact. Its ears flick forward and back, monitoring both my movements and the acoustic environment around us for any signs of additional threats. Jaguars are solitary hunters, but they are also intelligent enough to recognize when discretion represents the better part of valor. A sudden movement in the water between us creates a moment of shared distraction. A large fish, probably a peacock bass seeking the cooler water near the shore, breaks the surface in a shower of silver droplets. Both predators track the movement instinctively, our hunting instincts momentarily overriding territorial concerns. The fish's escape dive sends ripples across the surface that reach both of us, a reminder that this territory contains resources worth fighting for. The jaguar's response to this distraction reveals crucial information about its tactical thinking. Rather than using the moment to press its territorial claim or retreat to a safer distance, it returns its full attention to me within seconds. This behavior suggests an experienced predator that understands the importance of maintaining focus during potential confrontations with other apex species. My own reaction is equally telling. I allow the fish's movement to register, but do not let it distract from the primary threat assessment. This kind of disciplined attention to priorities is what separates successful apex predators from those that become cautionary tales in the evolutionary record. Every sense remains focused on the jaguar, while peripheral awareness monitors the broader environment for additional threats or opportunities. The standoff continues as darkness deepens around the lagoon. The changing light conditions favor the jaguar's visual hunting adaptations while enhancing my thermal detection capabilities. We are approaching the time when this territorial dispute must be resolved, one way or another. The optimal hunting hours are too valuable to waste in extended confrontations that benefit neither predator. The jaguar's body language shifts subtly, muscles tensing almost imperceptibly as it prepares for decisive action. Its weight shifts forward onto its front paws, and its tail twitches with the controlled energy of a predator reaching the limits of its patience. The chemical signature in the air changes as stress hormones spike, indicating that the evaluation period is ending and the action phase is about to begin. I coil my body into the perfect striking position, every muscle fiber aligned for maximum explosive power. The water around me creates both advantage and disadvantage. My natural element provides perfect concealment and mobility, but also limits my options for rapid positional changes. The jaguar's terrestrial advantages are equally balanced by its unfamiliarity with aquatic combat scenarios. The moment of truth arrives with startling suddenness. The jaguar explodes forward in a charge that covers the distance between us in 3 powerful bounds, its massive form airborne for the final leap that will determine whether this territorial dispute ends in victory, defeat, or mutual withdrawal. Time slows as 2 apex predators collide in the eternal dance of dominance that has shaped ecosystems since the dawn of complex life. A week without sun torpor in turbid depths. The clouds gather with the weight of mountains, pressing down upon the river system like a grey woolen blanket that muffles both light and sound. For 7 days now, the sun has been nothing more than a pale suggestion behind the thick overcast, its warming rays filtered to mere whispers by the atmospheric river that has settled over our region. The temperature of both air and water has dropped 10 degrees, a change that fundamentally alters the rhythm of life for a cold-blooded predator like myself. I feel the chill deep in my bones, in the very core of my being where metabolism governs the possibility of movement itself. Without the sun's direct energy to warm my massive body, I must retreat into the ancient survival strategy that has sustained my kind through countless climatic challenges. The deep torpor that slows my heart to 10 beats per minute, that reduces my breathing to barely perceptible movements, that turns my body into a living sculpture of patient endurance. My chosen refuge lies in the deepest part of the Oxbow Lake, where the bottom drops to nearly 5 meters, and the water retains what little heat it can from the thermal mass of the earth itself. Here, beneath a blanket of decomposing leaves that have drifted down from the surface over months and years, I settle into the metabolic state that bridges the gap between life and suspended animation. The leaf litter creates its own microenvironment around my resting form. Decades of fallen vegetation have created a soft, organic mattress that insulates my body from the cooler sediments below while providing the perfect camouflage for a predator that has temporarily abandoned active hunting. My scales blend seamlessly with the browns and blacks of decomposing plant matter, making me virtually invisible to any creature that might stumble upon my resting place. My breathing rhythm slows to match the pulse of the earth itself. Each inhalation draws precious oxygen that must be used with miserly efficiency throughout my body. The oxygen binds to hemoglobin with enhanced affinity in the cooler temperatures, allowing my blood to carry its life-sustaining cargo more effectively, even as my circulation slows to a mere trickle of its normal flow. The psychological aspects of torpor are as profound as the physical ones. Time loses its normal meaning when consciousness becomes a dim flicker rather than a bright flame. Hours pass like minutes, while minutes can stretch into subjective eternities when awareness periodically surfaces from the depths of metabolic shutdown. I exist in a state between dreaming and waking, where the boundaries between self and environment blur into something approaching unity with the river itself. My sensory systems scale back their operations to match my reduced energy budget. The chemical analysis that normally provides constant information about my surroundings becomes sporadic, limited to the most essential monitoring functions. My lateral line organs still detect major disturbances in the water around me, but the sensitivity drops dramatically as neural activity decreases throughout my body. Yet even in this reduced state, I remain connected to the ecosystem around me. The subtle vibrations of fish swimming overhead register in my consciousness like distant thunder. The pressure waves created by a swimming caiman reach me as faint echoes of the active world above. My body has become a sensitive instrument for detecting the rhythms of life that continue even as my own participation in those rhythms becomes minimal. The leaf litter around me teems with microscopic life forms that create their own complex ecosystem. Bacteria break down cellulose and lignin, releasing nutrients back into the water column in a process that has continued unchanged for millions of years. Small invertebrates burrow through the organic matrix, creating channels that allow water circulation, while their own life processes contribute to the slow decomposition that enriches the entire aquatic environment. My metabolic rate has dropped to perhaps 5% of its normal level, a reduction so dramatic that my body temperature begins to approach that of the surrounding water. This convergence creates a state where the boundary between my physical form and the environment becomes increasingly theoretical. I am becoming part of the thermal and chemical landscape of the lake bottom, a living geological feature that happens to possess the potential for consciousness. The chemistry of my blood changes to accommodate this extended period of reduced activity. Lactate levels remain low despite the minimal oxygen circulation, while glucose metabolism shifts into a super-efficient mode that extracts maximum energy from minimum resources. My liver processes waste products at a fraction of its normal rate, while my kidneys virtually shut down non-essential functions to conserve the energy required for basic cellular maintenance. Above me, the surface world continues its own adaptations to the prolonged cool period. Fish become sluggish, their own metabolisms slowing in response to the cooler water. Aquatic insects enter dormant phases, while many bird species alter their feeding patterns to accommodate the reduced activity of their normal prey base. The entire ecosystem shifts into a lower gear, waiting for the return of solar energy to restore normal activity levels. My digestive system has long since processed the last meal taken before this cooling period began. The empty stomach creates its own advantages during torpor, eliminating the energy demands of digestion while reducing the body mass that must be maintained at survival temperatures. Hunger becomes an abstract concept, filed away with other active concerns that have no relevance during this period of minimal existence. The darkness of the depths matches the darkness of the sky above, creating a uniformity of environment that seems perfectly suited to my current state. Light becomes irrelevant when vision is no longer needed for navigation or hunting. The world narrows to the essential functions of gas exchange, minimal circulation, and the basic cellular processes that maintain the possibility of future activity. Occasionally, my consciousness surfaces enough to register the passage of larger creatures through my domain. A river dolphin surfaces somewhere in the distance, its breathing creating pressure waves that reach even my reduced sensory apparatus. A large catfish prowls the bottom nearby, its barbels probing the sediment for food in the methodical way of successful bottom feeders. These encounters feel like messages from another reality, confirmation that life continues in its various forms while I exist in this state of voluntary suspension. The decomposition processes around me release trace amounts of heat as bacteria break down organic matter. This biological warmth, while minimal, represents a measurable contribution to my thermal environment. My body has positioned itself to take advantage of these micro-heat sources, optimizing every available calorie of environmental energy to maintain the basic functions that will allow eventual return to active predation. Dreams, if they can be called that, drift through my consciousness like slow-moving clouds. Memories of successful hunts blend with sensory impressions from the current environment to create a stream of images and sensations that have no linear narrative. Time becomes circular, with past and present flowing together in patterns that follow the rhythm of my slowed heartbeat rather than any external chronology. My immune system operates at minimal levels during this period, conserving energy by reducing the cellular activity normally devoted to pathogen detection and response. This calculated risk reflects the evolutionary wisdom that recognizes environmental challenges requiring temporary vulnerability in some systems to ensure survival of the organism as a whole. The water around me grows gradually more turbid as runoff from the cooler weather carries additional sediment and organic matter into the lake system. This increased opacity provides additional concealment for my resting form while creating the perfect conditions for the patient waiting that characterizes successful survival through adverse conditions. In the green-black depths of my temporary hibernation, I embody the ultimate expression of adaptive patience, a living demonstration of how complex organisms can reduce their requirements to almost nothing while maintaining the potential for future activity. The river holds its breath around me, and I become part of that held breath, a note in the slow symphony of survival that has played since life first learned to endure. Dangerous currents evading human nets. The vibrations reach me through the water like mechanical thunder, a rhythmic pounding that speaks of human activity in the upper reaches of my territory. The sound carries the distinctive signature of outboard motors, those alien intruders that have become increasingly common in recent years. But this is different from the occasional fisherman or river traveler. Persistence and pattern of the engine noise suggests something more systematic, more organized, and infinitely more dangerous. I rise from my resting place in the deep channel, my body alert to threats that my ancestors never faced. The chemical analysis of the water brings disturbing news, traces of fuel and oil that speak of multiple vessels operating in coordinated fashion. The metallic tang of nylon and steel that indicates nets, traps, and other human fishing apparatus deployed with industrial efficiency rather than traditional subsistence methods. The first visual confirmation comes as shadows moving against the surface light, dark shapes that cut across the natural patterns of sun and cloud reflection. These are not the gentle disturbances created by canoes or even individual motorboats. These are larger vessels, moving with purpose, creating wake patterns that speak of systematic coverage of the water surface rather than simple transportation from one point to another. My lateral line organs detect the artificial turbulence created by propellers churning through water, a mechanical violence that contrasts sharply with the natural flow patterns I have known throughout my life. The pressure waves carry information about vessel size, speed, and direction, building a three-dimensional picture of human activity that grows more concerning with each passing minute. The chemical signature of the water tells stories that no anaconda should have to read, traces of synthetic materials that have no place in natural ecosystems. The distinctive molecular markers of industrial fishing operations that strip entire watersheds of their biological wealth. Most disturbing of all, the chemical residue of illegal trafficking operations that use the river as a highway for transporting contraband, leaving pollution and disruption in their wake. I begin moving toward deeper water, seeking refuge in the areas where human activity is typically minimal due to navigation challenges and distance from shore. But as I travel, the evidence of systematic human intrusion becomes more apparent. Ghost nets drift like transparent predators through my domain, abandoned fishing gear that continues to trap and kill long after its original purpose has been served. The first net I encounter stretches across a narrow channel like a deadly spider web, its monofilament strands nearly invisible until they catch and reflect light at just the right angle. These synthetic fibers are stronger than any natural material, capable of entangling even an animal of my size and strength. The net shows signs of recent deployment, fresh enough to retain the chemical signatures of the boat that placed it, old enough to have already claimed several victims whose decomposing remains hang trapped in its mesh. I navigate around this death trap with extreme caution, my body reading the water for signs of additional nets that might be strategically placed to channel prey toward this killing field. Human fishing operations of this scale often employ multiple nets in coordinated patterns designed to maximize capture efficiency while minimizing escape opportunities. My passage through these waters has become a deadly maze, where each turn might lead to entanglement and death. The sound of engines grows closer, accompanied by human voices carrying across the water with the careless confidence of predators who believe themselves to be at the top of the food chain. The language is Portuguese mixed with local dialects, discussing catch quotas and market prices in terms that reduce the river's living creatures to mere economic units. These are not subsistence fishermen taking what they need to survive. These are commercial operators harvesting biological wealth for distant markets. A new chemical signature appears in the water, one that makes my predatory instincts recoil in disgust. The distinctive scent markers of illegal wildlife trafficking operations, the residue of boats used to transport not just fish but also live animals destined for the black market. Anacondas, caimans, exotic birds, even jaguarsaur reduced to commodities in the ruthless arithmetic of international wildlife crime. The realization that I am not just a potential bycatch but a specific target transforms my movement through the water from cautious navigation to active evasion. Large anacondas command high prices in illegal markets, our skins valued for leather goods while live specimens feed the appetite for exotic pets among wealthy collectors who care nothing for the ecosystems their demand destroys. I alter my route toward the most difficult navigation areas, places where large vessels cannot follow, and where the deployment of nets becomes challenging due to underwater obstacles. The maze of fallen trees and submerged root systems that typically complicate my hunting now becomes a refuge, offering concealment and protection from human predators, whose methods are far more destructive than anything nature has devised. The mechanical sounds intensify as the operation moves through the area with systematic thoroughness. Multiple vessels working in coordination, their engines creating an acoustic landscape of industrial violence that sends every creature in the vicinity fleeing toward whatever safety can be found. Fish scatter toward deeper channels, birds abandon their normal feeding areas, and even normally territorial species like caimans retreat from their usual haunts. A new threat emerges as I navigate the tangled underwater forest. Nets suspended vertically in the water column, designed to intercept creatures attempting to move through what appears to be open water. These barriers are nearly impossible to detect until contact occurs, and by then escape becomes a matter of strength and luck rather than skill and intelligence. The chemical trail in the water reveals the systematic nature of this operation. Multiple boats have passed through this area repeatedly over several days, each trip leaving its own signature in the water chemistry. The accumulation of fuel residue, engine oil, and synthetic materials creates a pollution signature that speaks of large-scale commercial fishing rather than traditional subsistence activities. My movement becomes increasingly constrained as evidence of human activity surrounds my territory. Traditional escape routes are blocked by nets or made too dangerous by the presence of vessels whose operators would see my capture as a significant profit opportunity. The patient hunting grounds that have sustained me for years are being systematically destroyed by methods that show no regard for the ecological balance that maintains this ecosystem. The psychological impact of this invasion is as significant as the physical threat. For millions of years, my ancestors evolved to deal with natural predators whose behavior followed predictable patterns based on biological needs and environmental constraints. But human predators operate according to economic incentives that have no relationship to ecological balance or natural limits. The sound of winches operating carries across the water, mechanical devices capable of hauling nets filled with whatever marine life they have captured. The violence of this sound contrasts sharply with the natural rhythms of the river, a mechanical heartbeat that speaks of systematic extraction rather than sustainable interaction with the environment. I seek refuge in the deepest channel available, a narrow gorge carved by centuries of water flow, where the depth provides protection from surface operations and the steep underwater walls make net deployment nearly impossible. Here, surrounded by the natural architecture of the river itself, I wait for the human storm to pass, hoping that my territory will survive this assault with enough integrity to remain viable habitat. The chemical signature of the water will take weeks to return to normal after this industrial fishing operation moves on to devastate other areas. The ghost nets they leave behind will continue killing for months or years until they finally degrade enough to release their grip on the underwater landscape. The ecological damage extends far beyond the immediate harvest, creating lasting impacts that will affect the entire food web for generations. In the murky depths of my refuge, I embody the plight of apex predators in an age when human activity has transformed natural selection into a lottery where survival depends increasingly on avoiding encounters with the most destructive species the planet has ever produced. Season of sense mate trailing. The hormonal tide begins subtly, like the first whisper of dawn across dark water. Deep within my body, ancient chemical processes awaken as my reproductive cycle enters its most critical phase. The change starts in my brain, cascades through specialized glands, and flows outward through my bloodstream until every scale, every breath, Every movement carries the unmistakable signature of a female anaconda ready for breeding. The pheromone release transforms me from solitary predator into a beacon of biological possibility. The complex mixture of hormones and organic compounds that my body now produces creates an invisible trail through the water, a chemical highway that announces my reproductive status to every male anaconda within a radius that stretches for kilometers through the interconnected waterways of my territory. I feel the change in my body chemistry as a heightened awareness, a sharpening of senses that goes beyond my normal predatory focus. My tongue flicks more frequently, tasting the water for the answering chemical signatures that will tell me if my reproductive advertisements have been received. The familiar environment takes on new dimensions as I begin to perceive it not just as hunting territory but as potential breeding ground. The first response comes within hours of my initial pheromone release. A faint chemical signature drifts downstream, carrying the distinctive molecular markers of a mature male anaconda. The scent profile tells me everything I need to know about this potential suitor: his size, his health, his nutritional status, even his stress levels. This is a large specimen, probably 4 meters in length, well-fed and confident enough to begin the dangerous journey toward my location. But he is not alone. As the day progresses, my chemical monitoring reveals additional male signatures appearing in the water around my territory. Each carries its own distinct chemical fingerprint, a complex mixture of hormones, pheromones, and metabolic byproducts that creates an individual identity as unique as a human fingerprint. By evening, I have detected at least 5 different males responding to my reproductive signals. The dynamics of this gathering follow ancient patterns encoded in anaconda DNA. Males must balance their desire to breed with the very real dangers involved in approaching a female of my size and temperament. A breeding female anaconda is not only receptive to mating, but also extremely well-fed and therefore at peak physical condition. The same female who might welcome a male's advances could just as easily decide he would make a more useful meal than mate. My movement patterns change as the breeding season intensifies. Instead of the patient hunting circuits that normally define my territorial behavior, I begin to follow routes that maximize the distribution of my chemical signals throughout the water system. I surface more frequently, allowing my pheromone trail to spread not just through the water column but also into the air above, where it can travel even greater distances on favorable winds. The first visual contact comes at sunset 3 days into my reproductive cycling. A large male breaks the surface 50 meters downstream, his head rising just enough to taste the air before submerging again. Even at this distance, I can read the body language of a male anaconda assessing both opportunity and risk. His movements are deliberate but cautious, approaching close enough to confirm my location, while maintaining sufficient distance to escape should my mood prove inhospitable. The chemical dialogue between us becomes increasingly complex as he draws nearer. His scent carries stress hormones that speak of the considerable energy expenditure required to reach my territory, but also the elevated testosterone levels that drive male anacondas to take extraordinary risks during breeding season. My own chemical output adjusts in response, releasing additional pheromones that provide more detailed information about my reproductive status and receptivity. A second male appears the following morning. This one, approaching from upstream with the confident movements of an anaconda that has successfully navigated territorial waters to reach a breeding opportunity. The interaction between the two males creates its own chemical subplot in the water around my position. Testosterone levels spike as they become aware of each other's presence, while stress pheromones indicate the tension inherent in a situation where competition for breeding rights must be balanced against the risks of actual combat. The gathering continues throughout the week as additional males arrive from increasingly distant territories. Each new arrival shifts the chemical and behavioral dynamics of the group, creating a complex social environment unlike anything these normally solitary animals experience at any other time. The water around my chosen breeding area becomes saturated with the overlapping chemical signatures of half a dozen mature male anacondas, each bringing his own genetic heritage and survival history to this ancient reproductive lottery. My own behavior during this period reflects the profound physiological changes occurring within my body. The elevated hormone levels affect not just my reproductive system but my entire metabolism, altering everything from my digestive efficiency to my immune response. I become simultaneously more receptive to male approaches and more aggressively protective of my territory, a paradox that reflects the complex evolutionary pressures that shape anaconda breeding behavior. The males begin to establish a loose hierarchy based on size, condition, and the mysterious factors that determine dominance among creatures that rarely interact socially outside of breeding contexts. The largest male, a magnificent specimen that I estimate at nearly 5 meters in length, begins to position himself closest to my preferred resting areas. His chemical signature reveals the confidence of an animal accustomed to reproductive success, but also the wariness of a predator that understands the risks involved in approaching a female anaconda during her most unpredictable period. Smaller males must be more creative in their courtship strategies, using stealth and persistence rather than dominance to compete for breeding opportunities. I detect their presence in the peripheral areas of my territory, waiting for moments when the larger males are distracted or absent before attempting their own approaches. The chemical intelligence they gather during these reconnaissance missions will inform their tactics when the actual mating opportunity presents itself. The psychological aspects of this gathering affect me as profoundly as the physical changes. The constant presence of multiple males creates a social environment that awakens behavioral patterns dormant since my last breeding cycle. I find myself responding to their chemical signals with increasingly complex pheromone releases, fine-tuning my reproductive advertising to encourage the competition that will ultimately result in mating with the most genetically fit available male. The water chemistry around my territory has been completely transformed by this reproductive gathering. What was once the relatively simple chemical landscape of a solitary predator's domain has become a complex mixture of overlapping scent trails, hormonal signatures, and stress indicators that creates a unique microenvironment. Any creature with chemical sensory capability would recognize this area as the site of significant anaconda breeding activity, a recognition that brings both opportunities and dangers. As the gathering reaches its peak intensity, with 6 mature males now circling my territory in an elaborate aquatic dance of competition and courtship, I prepare for the culminating event that will determine which genetic heritage combines with mine to create the next generation of anacondas. The ancient ritual of reproduction continues according to patterns established millions of years ago, yet each instance remains unique in its specific combination of individuals, circumstances, and environmental conditions. The season of scents has reached its crescendo, and the water itself seems to hold its breath in anticipation of the primal drama about to unfold in the warm shallows where life perpetuates itself according to the oldest laws in the biological universe. Knot of Giants breeding ball. The convergence begins at dawn when the water temperature reaches the perfect threshold that triggers the final phase of anaconda reproduction. 6 mature males have gathered in response to my chemical advertisements, and now the complex choreography of anaconda mating begins in earnest. What follows will be one of nature's most extraordinary displays of reproductive competition, a 12-hour marathon of strength, endurance, and genetic determination. I position myself in the shallow warming area where fallen logs create a natural amphitheater, the water depth perfect for the complex physical demands of anaconda reproduction. My body, now at peak receptivity, releases the final chemical signals that announce the brief window during which fertilization can occur. The pheromone concentration in the water reaches levels that trigger immediate behavioral responses in every male within sensing range. The largest male, the 5-meter giant who has maintained dominance throughout the gathering period, moves first. His approach is confident but respectful, his massive body creating pressure waves that announce his intentions, while his chemical signature broadcasts both strength and willingness to compete for breeding rights. His scales gleam with the perfect condition that speaks of successful predation and optimal health. But he is not alone in his intentions. The other males, ranging in size from 3.5 to 4.5 meters, converge simultaneously on my position. What begins as individual courtship attempts rapidly evolves into something far more complex, a breeding ball, where multiple males attempt to secure mating position through a combination of size, strength, stamina, and tactical positioning. The initial contact is surprisingly gentle given the massive size and strength of the participants. The dominant male positions himself along my length, his body finding the anatomical landmarks that will allow successful copulation. But the smaller males are not deterred by his size advantage. They begin to wrap themselves around both of us, creating an increasingly complex tangle of serpentine bodies that defies easy description. The physics of the situation become extraordinary as hundreds of kilograms of anaconda flesh interweave in the warm shallows. My own body serves as both the prize and the anchor point for this reproductive competition, while the males must balance their individual mating attempts with the need to prevent competitors from achieving successful positioning. The result is a living knot of muscle and scale that shifts and flows like some primordial organism. The water around us turns murky as our combined movements stir up sediment from the bottom, creating a concealing cloud that hides the intimate details of this reproductive drama from the curious eyes of other species. Steam rises from our collective body heat, creating microclimates in the air above us, as our combined metabolisms generate temperatures significantly above the ambient water temperature. Each male brings his own strategy to this ancient competition. The largest relies on sheer size and strength, using his mass to maintain preferred positioning while physically displacing smaller competitors. The second largest employs speed and agility, taking advantage of brief opportunities when the dominant male's attention is focused elsewhere. The smaller males must be more creative, using cooperative tactics and persistence rather than direct confrontation. My role in this process is both passive and active, both prize and participant. While the males compete for position, I must evaluate their genetic fitness through direct physical contact, chemical analysis of their stress responses, and assessment of their stamina and determination. Evolution has equipped me with sensory capabilities that allow real-time analysis of male quality during the mating process itself. The breeding ball tightens and loosens in rhythmic cycles as different males achieve temporary advantages in the competition for access. Bodies that individually are paragons of predatory efficiency become components in a larger organism whose only purpose is the continuation of the species. The boundaries between individual identity and collective function blur as we become something greater than the sum of our parts. The physical demands on all participants are extraordinary. Maintaining position in a breeding ball requires constant muscular effort, while the competition for breeding rights pushes each male to the limits of his strength and endurance. Heart rates elevate dramatically, breathing becomes labored, and stress hormones flood bloodstreams as bodies designed for patient ambush predation engage in sustained high-intensity activity. Hours pass in this state of reproductive intensity, the ball of intertwined bodies shifting position gradually as the competition continues. Smaller males occasionally break away to rest and recover before rejoining the competition, while the larger specimens maintain their positions through sheer determination and superior physical condition. The endurance aspect of anaconda reproduction serves as a final filter for genetic quality, ensuring that only the most fit males achieve breeding success. The chemical environment within the breeding ball becomes incredibly complex as stress hormones, reproductive pheromones, and metabolic byproducts create a unique biochemical signature. Each male's individual chemical identity blends with the others to create a collective scent profile that will be detectable in the water for days after the breeding concludes. My own physiological responses during this process involve careful evaluation of each male's potential contribution to offspring viability. The direct physical contact allows assessment of muscle tone, scale condition, body temperature regulation, and stress response, all indicators of genetic fitness that will influence the survival prospects of any resulting offspring. The competition intensifies as the day progresses and the limited time window for successful fertilization narrows. Males who have been conserving energy for crucial moments now commit fully to the reproductive effort, resulting in increasingly dynamic shifts in positioning as temporary alliances form and dissolve based on immediate tactical advantages. The sounds of the breeding ball create their own acoustic signature, the rushing of water displaced by massive bodies in motion, the occasional hiss of expelled air as coils tighten, the splashing as the entire formation shifts position, in response to changing dynamics. These sounds carry across the water, potentially attracting the attention of predators or competitors, but the reproductive imperative overrides normal caution. As afternoon approaches, the sustained physical effort begins to show its effects on all participants. The largest male, despite his size advantage, shows signs of fatigue as smaller competitors take advantage of any momentary relaxation in his defensive positioning. The endurance competition that began at dawn evolves into a test of determination as much as physical capability. The climactic phase of reproduction occurs when successful positioning coincides with optimal physiological readiness in both male and female. The complex anatomy of anaconda reproduction requires precise alignment and sustained contact, factors that can only be achieved when dominance hierarchies have been clearly established and maintained through hours of competition. The successful male, having earned his genetic contribution through superior size, condition, stamina, and tactical skill, achieves the reproductive coupling that represents the culmination of months of territorial establishment, weeks of gathering and competition, and hours of direct physical contest. The moment of fertilization occurs within the complex living architecture of the breeding ball, witnessed and verified by the unsuccessful competitors who will carry the memory of this genetic selection into their own future reproductive attempts. As the breeding ball gradually dissolves, each male carrying away the chemical memories of this reproductive encounter, I begin the internal processes that will transform successful fertilization into developing offspring. The complex social environment that temporarily transforms solitary predators into a collective reproductive organism returns to individual territories and separate survival strategies. The shallow water where this ancient drama unfolded slowly clears as sediment settles and the chemical signatures of reproduction begin to dissipate into the broader river system. But the genetic consequences of this 12-hour marathon will echo through generations, as the successful combination of chromosomes begins the long process of creating new apex predators perfectly adapted to the challenges of life in these waters. After the frenzy, healing, and hunger, the solitude returns like a benediction after the intense social chaos of the breeding ball. As the last of the unsuccessful males disappears into the maze of waterways that connect to my territory, I find myself alone with the profound changes occurring within my body and the immediate challenges that successful reproduction has created for my survival. My scales show the evidence of the 12-hour reproductive marathon abraded areas, where the friction of multiple male bodies has worn away the protective outer layer, leaving patches of tender skin vulnerable to infection. The largest damage occurs along my flanks, where the dominant male's coils pressed against mine with crushing force, and around my tail where smaller males gripped desperately as they were gradually displaced by superior competitors. The healing process begins immediately, my immune system mobilizing resources to repair damaged tissue while maintaining the increased metabolic demands of early pregnancy. Specialized cells migrate to the abraded areas, beginning the complex process of scale regeneration that will restore my armor over the coming weeks. But this healing requires energy and nutrients that my body can ill afford given the recent reproductive ordeal. I have not fed for over a week, the breeding season having consumed time and energy that would normally be devoted to hunting. Now, carrying the early stages of developing embryos, my nutritional requirements have increased dramatically, just as my immediate hunting capabilities have been compromised by my injuries. This paradox represents one of nature's cruelest arithmetic problems. When reproduction is most critical, survival becomes most challenging. My movement through the water reveals the extent of my condition. What was once effortless grace has become careful navigation, as tender areas protest against the normal undulations of swimming. The abraded patches create drag and turbulence that affect my hydrodynamic efficiency, making it more difficult to achieve the perfect positioning required for successful ambush predation. The chemical signature in the water around me has changed as well. The stress hormones released during the intense breeding competition combine with the inflammatory compounds produced by healing tissue to create a scent profile that advertises vulnerability to any predator or competitor capable of reading such chemical information. I have become temporarily more prey than predator in the ruthless hierarchy of the river ecosystem. My first hunting attempt comes on the third day after the breeding, driven by hunger that has reached desperate levels and nutritional demands that cannot be ignored. I position myself near a fallen tree, where capybaras often come to feed, but my compromised mobility makes the precise timing of an ambush attack far more difficult than normal. The strike, when it comes, lacks the explosive power that characterizes my usual predatory technique. The targeter, young capybara, perhaps 30 kilograms in weight, detects my movement and escapes into shallow water where my reduced mobility gives it a significant advantage. The failed hunt represents not just a missed meal, but a dangerous expenditure of energy that my compromised system can barely afford. Each unsuccessful hunting attempt brings me closer to the nutritional crisis that could threaten both my survival and the viability of my developing offspring. The healing process requires protein for tissue repair, calcium for scale regeneration, and energy for the immune responses that prevent infection of abraded areas. These same nutrients are being diverted to support the early stages of embryonic development, creating a biological competition between my immediate survival needs and my reproductive success. Evolution has equipped me with the ability to reabsorb embryos if necessary, but this extreme measure represents reproductive failure that makes the risks of the breeding season meaningless. My second hunting attempt focuses on easier prey fish rather than large mammals, accepting smaller nutritional rewards in exchange for higher success probability. A large catfish, probably weighing 15 kilograms, provides the first meal since before the breeding ball began. The nutrients flood my system with life-sustaining energy, but the portion devoted to healing and reproduction means that true satiation remains elusive. The abraded areas begin to show signs of healing by the end of the first week. New scale tissue emerges as small, pale patches that will gradually darken and harden to match my normal protective covering. The immune system has successfully prevented infection, but the metabolic cost of this defensive effort has been substantial. My body weight has dropped noticeably despite the recent feeding, reflecting the enormous energy demands of simultaneous healing and early pregnancy. My hunting strategy must adapt to my temporarily reduced capabilities. Instead of the patient positioning and explosive strikes that normally characterize my predatory behavior, I must rely more heavily on stealth and opportunity. Smaller prey that would normally be beneath my notice become worthwhile targets when measured against my compromised hunting efficiency. The psychological aspects of this recovery period are as challenging as the physical ones. The transformation from supreme predator to vulnerable survivor creates a constant tension between necessary caution and the aggressive confidence that normally defines my interactions with the environment. Every movement must be evaluated for its potential to reopen healing wounds or expose me to threats that my normal condition would easily handle. A week of careful hunting and conservative behavior begins to restore both my physical condition and my predatory confidence. The scales have regenerated enough to provide adequate protection, while improved nutrition has begun to address the energy deficits created by reproduction and healing. The embryos, now firmly established and drawing steady nutrients from my system, represent successful reproduction rather than biological burden. My chemical signature begins to stabilize as stress hormones return to normal levels and the inflammatory compounds associated with tissue repair decrease in concentration. The scent of vulnerability that marked my immediate post-breeding condition gradually fades, replaced by the more familiar chemical profile of a healthy apex predator in the early stages of successful pregnancy. The territorial boundaries that became blurred during the breeding season require re-establishment as my hunting capabilities return to normal levels. Other predators, sensing my temporary weakness, may have expanded their own territories into areas they would normally avoid. The process of reasserting dominance must be balanced against the need to avoid unnecessary risks that could threaten the developing embryos. By the end of the second week, I have achieved a successful hunt of appropriate Scalia 40-kilogram peccary that provides the protein and energy reserves necessary to support both healing and pregnancy through their next phases. The strike that brings down this prey shows the return of my normal explosive power, though I remain conscious of the need to protect my still tender flanks from unnecessary strain. The transformation from the social chaos of reproduction to the careful solitude of recovery represents one of many paradoxes in the life cycle of an apex predator. The very behaviors that ensure genetic success create vulnerabilities that threaten individual survival, while the healing process that restores predatory capability must compete with reproductive demands for limited biological resources. In the quiet waters of my territory, now free from the chemical signatures of competing males and the turbulence of reproductive activity, I settle into the patient routine of successful pregnancy. The embryos developing within my body represent the future of my genetic lineage, while my healing tissues restore the predatory capabilities that will ensure my survival to see that future realized. The river flows around me as it has for millions of years, carrying away the evidence of reproduction and renewal, while bringing new opportunities for the apex predator who has successfully navigated the dangerous transition from mating to motherhood in the eternal cycle of life in these ancient waters. Gestation in shadow, protecting the young within. The embryos within my body announce their presence through subtle but unmistakable changes in my internal chemistry and physical condition. 6 weeks after the breeding bull, the first stirrings of new life begin to reshape my anatomy and alter every aspect of my existence. I carry within me perhaps 30 developing anacondas, each no larger than my thumb, but already beginning to show the distinctive features that will make them perfect aquatic predators. My body has become a living incubator, carefully regulating temperature, oxygen levels, and nutrient flow to ensure optimal development of the embryos. The process requires constant physiological adjustment as my reproductive system transforms to meet the escalating demands of gestation. Blood volume increases dramatically to service both my own tissues and the developing offspring, while my heart works harder to pump this expanded circulation through increasingly complex pathways. The physical changes become more apparent with each passing week. My body wall begins to show the subtle bulges that indicate embryonic positioning within my reproductive tract. Unlike mammals, I do not carry my young in a single central location but rather distribute them along a significant portion of my body length, creating a more complex spatial arrangement that affects my balance and movement through the water. Thermoregulation becomes critically important during this period, as the developing embryos require precise temperature control for proper development. I spend longer periods basking in shallow water, where solar heating can maintain optimal conditions, while avoiding the deeper, cooler areas that I might normally prefer for hunting or rest. Each degree of temperature variation can affect developmental outcomes, making my behavioral choices matter not just for my own survival but for the viability of an entire generation. My hunting patterns must adapt to the mechanical constraints imposed by pregnancy. The explosive coiling movements that characterize normal anaconda predation become more difficult as the embryos create internal pressure that limits my flexibility. Strikes must be more carefully calculated, with greater emphasis on precision rather than the overwhelming force that usually guarantees success. The metabolic demands of supporting 30 developing embryos are staggering. My food requirements increase by nearly 50% as nutrients are diverted from my own tissue maintenance to support the rapidly growing offspring. Each embryo requires proteins for tissue development, calcium for bone formation, and lipids for neural development. The competition for these resources between my own body and the embryos creates a constant balancing act that will continue throughout the gestation period. My immune system faces unique challenges during pregnancy, as it must protect both my own body and the developing embryos from pathogens, while avoiding immune responses that might threaten the offspring. The embryos carry genetic material from the male who sired them, making them partially foreign to my immune system despite developing within my own body. Specialized immune suppression mechanisms prevent rejection while maintaining disease resistance. The behavioral changes that accompany pregnancy extend beyond simple mechanical adaptations. My territorial instincts intensify as protective behaviors for the developing offspring override normal risk tolerance. Areas of my territory that I might normally defend, only if directly challenged, become subjects of proactive protection. Any potential threat to the gestation sites receives immediate and aggressive response. Chemical communication becomes more complex as pregnancy progresses. My scent signature includes new compounds that advertise my reproductive status to other anacondas, while potentially deterring aggressive approaches from competitors. These chemical changes serve as both protection and announcement, ensuring that other members of my species recognize my condition and adjust their behavior accordingly. Sleep patterns alter significantly during gestation, as the physical demands of supporting developing embryos create fatigue that must be balanced against the need for vigilance. The pregnant anaconda cannot afford the deep torpor that characterizes non-reproductive periods, yet the energy demands of constant alertness must be weighed against the metabolic costs of supporting 30 developing lives. The embryos begin to show coordinated movement patterns by the 3rd month of gestation, creating internal sensations that represent my first direct contact with my offspring. These movements provide feedback about embryonic health and development, while creating new challenges for my own mobility and hunting efficiency. Each embryonic movement is monitored by internal sensors that can detect abnormalities or developmental problems. My selection of resting sites becomes increasingly important as pregnancy progresses. The locations must provide optimal thermoregulation for embryonic development, while offering security from predators who might see a pregnant anaconda as a vulnerable target. The deep channels that normally provide safety become less desirable as the need for temperature control outweighs considerations of defensive positioning. Nutritional requirements become more specialized as different phases of embryonic development demand specific nutrients. Early development requires massive protein synthesis for tissue formation, while later stages need calcium for skeletal development and specialized lipids for nervous system formation. My hunting must target prey species that provide these specific nutritional components rather than simply maximizing caloric intake. The water chemistry around my territory changes as my altered metabolism produces different waste products and chemical signatures. These changes can affect the behavior of prey species, potentially making hunting more difficult, while also attracting scavengers and opportunistic predators drawn by the chemical evidence of a pregnant apex predator. Defensive behaviors intensify as the embryos approach viability. Any disturbance that might threaten successful gestation receives immediate attention, from subtle repositioning to aggressive defensive displays. The normally solitary anaconda develops heightened awareness of potential threats that extends far beyond normal territorial boundaries. The final weeks of gestation bring the greatest challenges as the embryos reach full development and prepare for independent life. My body becomes a complex life support system maintaining 30 separate circulatory and respiratory needs while preparing for the massive energy expenditure of live birth. Each embryo must be perfectly positioned for successful delivery, creating internal pressures and movements that affect every aspect of my daily existence. The psychological preparation for motherhood involves instinctive behavioral changes that will be crucial for offspring survival after birth. Protective instincts intensify while aggressive responses become more easily triggered. The patient hunting behaviors that characterize successful anaconda predation give way to the hypervigilant defensiveness that will be necessary to protect vulnerable newborns in their first days of life. As the gestation period nears its conclusion, I begin seeking the perfect birthing location: shallow, warm water with adequate vegetation cover, and multiple escape routes for newborn anacondas. The choice of birthing site can determine survival rates for the offspring, making this selection one of the most critical decisions in the reproductive cycle. The river ecosystem responds to my changing presence as chemical signatures announce the approaching conclusion of a successful gestation. Other predators may position themselves to take advantage of vulnerable newborns, while the ecosystem itself prepares for the injection of 30 new apex predators into the complex web of aquatic life that has sustained my kind for millions of years. In the shadowed depths where I maintain my vigil over the developing lives within my body, time moves according to the ancient rhythms of reproduction and renewal, each day bringing the next generation of river predators closer to their first independent breath in the waters that will define their existence. River shrinks, dry season perils. The transformation begins subtly, like a slowly tightening noose around the throat of the river ecosystem. Each day brings less water, as the distant Andean rains that fed the spring floods become memory and the relentless tropical sun begins its systematic extraction of moisture from every surface. The vast aquatic realm that sustained abundant life during the flood season contracts steadily into isolated pools and narrow channels that concentrate both predator and prey into increasingly desperate proximity. My territory, once an expansive network of interconnected waterways stretching for kilometers in every direction, now consists of 3 major pools connected by channels barely deep enough for my passage. The Oxbow Lake that served as my primary hunting ground has shrunk to half its flood season size, while the smaller tributaries have disappeared entirely, leaving only muddy depressions marked by the sun-baked tracks of animals forced to seek water elsewhere. The pregnancy makes this contraction especially challenging, as my increased size and reduced mobility limit my ability to follow the retreating waters to more favorable locations. The embryos within my body require stable conditions for continued development, yet the environmental stresses of the dry season threaten to disrupt the careful balance that successful gestation demands. I must choose between the security of familiar territory and the potential advantages of relocating to areas where water levels remain more stable. The water chemistry changes dramatically as volume decreases and concentration increases. Dissolved minerals reach levels that affect the behavior of prey species, while organic compounds from decomposing vegetation create chemical gradients that alter the normal patterns of aquatic life. The tea-colored water that normally provides perfect hunting concealment becomes murky with algae blooms fed by concentrated nutrients, reducing visibility even further, while creating oxygen depletion that forces fish to surface more frequently. Temperature regulation becomes increasingly difficult as the shallow water heats rapidly under the direct tropical sun. Surface temperatures can reach levels that threaten embryonic development, forcing me to seek deeper refuges during the hottest parts of the day while sacrificing prime hunting opportunities. The thermal stratification in the remaining pools creates distinct layers with different chemical compositions and oxygen levels, complicating navigation and hunting strategies. Prey behavior shifts dramatically in response to the changing conditions. Large mammals that once had numerous water sources to choose from now must risk exposure at the few remaining pools, creating opportunities for patient predators but also increasing competition among all carnivorous species. Capybaras, deer, and peccaries establish predictable patterns of movement between water sources, but these patterns also become known to every predator in the region. The concentration of wildlife around shrinking water sources creates a temporary abundance that masks the underlying crisis. Fish populations become dense in the remaining pools, but this apparent plenty conceals the fact that reproduction has virtually ceased and juvenile mortality has reached catastrophic levels. The ecosystem enters a holding pattern, waiting for the return of the rains while burning through stored biological capital at an unsustainable rate. My hunting success paradoxically improves even as my long-term survival prospects become more precarious. The predictable movement patterns of desperate prey animals make ambush predation easier, while the reduced water volume concentrates targets in areas where my mobility limitations have less impact. A successful hunt now, however, must sustain me through increasingly difficult conditions rather than simply maintaining normal energy levels. The psychological stress of the dry season affects all aspects of anaconda behavior. The constant vigilance required to monitor rapidly changing water levels combines with the territorial pressures created by habitat compression to create chronic stress that can affect immune function and embryonic development. Other anacondas, displaced from their normal territories by disappearing water sources, may attempt to establish themselves in my shrinking domain. Algae blooms begin to dominate the ecosystem as concentrated nutrients and intense sunlight create perfect conditions for explosive plant growth. The green scum that covers much of the water surface reduces oxygen exchange while creating perfect concealment for ambush predators. But the algae also produces toxins that accumulate in the food chain, potentially affecting both my health and the development of my embryos. The dry season reveals aspects of the river bottom normally hidden by meters of water. Ancient tree stumps emerge like monuments to past droughts, while channels carved by previous flood cycles become visible as contour lines in the mud. This exposure of normally submerged terrain creates new hunting opportunities, but also eliminates traditional refuges that provide security during vulnerable periods. Scavenger populations explode as the concentrated conditions increase mortality rates among stressed animals. Vultures gather in unprecedented numbers, while aquatic scavengers like catfish find abundant feeding opportunities in the oxygen-depleted areas where weaker fish cannot survive. This scavenger activity creates chemical signatures that can mask the scent trails of living prey animals. Competition with other apex predators intensifies as territory boundaries become meaningless in the face of ecological collapse. Caimans, forced from their normal territories by disappearing water, may attempt to establish themselves in pools I have claimed as essential to my survival. The normal protocols of territorial negotiation become irrelevant when habitat reduction makes coexistence impossible. The embryos within my body respond to the environmental stress with changes in development rate and positioning. Stress hormones in my bloodstream affect their growth patterns, while the altered temperature regimes disrupt the normal timing of developmental milestones. The gestation period may extend beyond normal parameters as embryonic development adjusts to suboptimal conditions. Fire becomes a constant threat as the dried vegetation surrounding the shrinking waterways creates perfect conditions for lightning-sparked blazes. The smoke from distant fires affects air quality and can drive terrestrial animals toward water sources in panicked migrations that create both hunting opportunities and dangerous overcrowding around the remaining pools. My choice of refuges must balance immediate survival needs against long-term territorial requirements. The deepest pool in my territory offers the best protection against temperature extremes and provides the most stable hunting opportunities, but it also represents the most likely target for territorial challenges from displaced predators seeking prime real estate in the contracted ecosystem. The chemical environment of the shrinking pools becomes increasingly complex as decomposition accelerates in the warming water and concentrated nutrients create toxic blooms. My chemoreception systems must learn to distinguish between normal scent trails and the artificial signatures created by algae toxins and decomposition products that have no counterpart in healthy aquatic ecosystems. As the dry season progresses toward its peak intensity, every day becomes a calculation of energy expenditure versus acquisition, territorial defense versus conservation of resources for embryonic development. The river that once seemed inexhaustible now reveals its limits, forcing ancient survival strategies to confront modern challenges in an environment that grows more precarious with each cloudless dawn. The scattered pools that remain reflect the sky like broken mirrors, each one a potential oasis or death trap depending on the complex interactions between hydrology, chemistry, temperature, and the desperate calculations of creatures caught between the demands of reproduction and the harsh arithmetic of survival in a world where water itself has become the scarcest and most precious resource. Fire on the banks, savanna burns. The smoke arrives before the flames, drifting across the water like a grey tide that transforms day into an eerie twilight. The distinctive acrid scent of burning grassland fills my chemical sensors with information about a fire burning perhaps 5 kilometers upwind, moving steadily toward my territory, with the inexorable advance of a natural disaster that recognizes no boundaries between terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems. Lightning from the previous night's brief thunderstorm has ignited the drought-stressed savanna that borders my shrinking domain. The fire spreads through vegetation so desiccated that it burns like tinder, creating a conflagration that will reshape the landscape and force every creature in its path to choose between flight and death. The pregnant anaconda faces an impossible calculation: remain in familiar territory that may become uninhabitable, or venture into unknown areas where territorial disputes could threaten both maternal survival and embryonic development. The first refugees appear as dark shapes moving through the smoke-hazed water. A family of capybaras enters my pool with the desperate urgency of animals fleeing mortal danger, their normal caution overwhelmed by the immediate threat of incineration. Behind them come smaller mammal sagutis, packers, even a young brocket deerel swimming toward the sanctuary of deeper water, despite their natural fear of aquatic predators. My predatory instincts respond to this sudden abundance of vulnerable prey with ancient hunger, but the larger implications of the fire create conflicting imperatives. The smoke-filled air makes breathing difficult, while the approaching flames threaten to create atmospheric conditions that could disrupt the delicate thermal balance required for successful embryonic development. The immediate opportunity for easy hunting must be weighed against the long-term threat to reproductive success. The chemistry of the air changes minute by minute as the fire draws closer. Carbon monoxide levels rise to concentrations that stress respiratory systems, while particulate matter creates an atmospheric soup that challenges even the robust physiology of apex predators. My embryos, dependent on my respiratory efficiency for their oxygen supply, become vulnerable to the deteriorating air quality that accompanies major wildfires. The fire's approach creates a temporary inversion of normal predator-prey relationships. Animals that would normally flee at my scent now cluster in the same refuge, their terror of burning overriding millions of years of evolved predator avoidance. A spectacular caiman surfaces just meters away, its presence normally sufficient to clear the water of smaller animals, yet the mammals continue their desperate swimming toward deeper sanctuary. The acoustic environment transforms as the fire approaches. The normal sounds of the ecosystem bird calls, insect buzzing, the gentle splash of normal aquatic activity give way to the ominous roar of combustion and the panic calls of fleeing animals. The crackling of burning vegetation creates a constant background noise that masks the subtle audio cues I normally use to track prey movement and assess environmental conditions. My breathing becomes more labored as smoke concentration increases, forcing me to surface more frequently to find pockets of cleaner air. Each breath brings not just oxygen but also the toxic products of combustion that stress my respiratory system and potentially affect the developing embryos through altered blood chemistry. The normal rhythm of surface breathing becomes a desperate search for breathable atmosphere. The water temperature begins to rise as radiant heat from the approaching flames affects even the aquatic environment. The thermal stratification that normally characterizes deep pools becomes unstable as surface heating disrupts the normal temperature gradients. My embryos, sensitive to temperature variations that could affect developmental timing, respond to these thermal changes with increased movement that I can feel as internal restlessness. Ash begins to fall like grey snow, covering the water surface and creating a film that interferes with normal gas exchange between air and water. The ash carries chemical compounds from burning vegetation that alter the water chemistry, while the physical barrier it creates reduces oxygen dissolution and creates anaerobic conditions that stress the entire aquatic ecosystem. The fire reaches the immediate vicinity of my pool as a wall of flame that towers above the surrounding vegetation, creating its own weather system through the massive convection currents generated by the combustion. The heat becomes intense enough to threaten protein denaturation in exposed tissues, forcing all aquatic life to seek the deepest available water while the inferno passes overhead. The experience of being submerged while fire rages above creates a surreal environment where the normal boundaries between elements lose meaning. The water provides sanctuary from the flames but cannot shield against the radiant heat, smoke inhalation, or the acoustic assault of a major wildfire. My body becomes a living barometer of the atmospheric violence occurring just meters above the surface. Oxygen levels in the water drop precipitously as the fire consumes available atmospheric oxygen, while the ash barrier prevents normal replenishment through surface exchange. Fish begin to exhibit stress behaviors, surfacing frequently in desperate attempts to extract oxygen from the depleted water column. The entire aquatic ecosystem enters crisis mode as fundamental life support systems become compromised. The fire passes with the speed of wind-driven combustion, leaving behind a transformed landscape where the familiar vegetation has been reduced to ash and charcoal. The immediate threat recedes, but the ecological consequences will persist for months or years as the ecosystem struggles to recover from the devastation. The smoke clears gradually, revealing a world where normal habitat boundaries have been erased by the equalizing force of fire. My pool, now isolated in a moonscape of burnt earth, has become a temporary ark containing displaced wildlife from a vast area of destroyed habitat. The concentration of animals creates both opportunity and challenge, as hunting abundance must be balanced against the increased competition for limited aquatic resources and the disruption of normal territorial boundaries. The water chemistry reflects the fire's passage through elevated levels of ash-derived minerals and organic compounds leached from burned vegetation. These chemical changes affect the behavior of prey species, while potentially impacting the embryonic development occurring within my body. The familiar chemical landscape of my territory has been replaced by an alien environment that requires rapid adaptation for survival. Recovery from the fire's passage becomes a race against time as the dry season continues and water levels continue to drop. The destroyed vegetation that once provided shade and windbreak has been eliminated, exposing the remaining pools to increased evaporation and solar heating. The fire that was intended to be a brief crisis becomes the beginning of an extended period of ecosystem stress. The survivors of the fire face a transformed world where traditional boundaries between terrestrial and aquatic habitats have been blurred by the destruction of shoreline vegetation. Recovery will require years of rainfall and regrowth, while immediate survival depends on the capacity of remaining aquatic refuges to support wildlife populations far exceeding their normal carrying capacity. In the ash-covered waters of my contracted domain, surrounded by the carbonized remnants of a once green world, I represent both destroyer and protectora predator, whose hunting maintains population balance while carrying within my body the next generation that will populate the slowly recovering ecosystem when the rains finally return to wash ash from the land and begin the long process of renewal. Ghosts of the past, Anaconda, legends, human fear. The indigenous knowledge holders speak of my kind in whispers that carry across generations, their words weaving anacondas into the mythological fabric that binds human consciousness to the river systems we both call home. In the Yanomami creation stories, we are the primordial serpents who shape the very channels through which the water flows, our massive bodies carving the oxbow lakes and deep pools that define the geography of this ancient landscape. The rubber boom hunters of the late 19th century brought different fears and different stories, tales shaped by European serpent mythology, mixed with the harsh realities of extracting latex from trees that grew in Anaconda territory. Their journals speak of encounters with snakes so large they could swallow a grown man, exaggerations born from glimpsed shadows, and the natural human tendency to magnify threats that represent the ultimate loss of control over one's environment. Modern cryptid lore has transformed my species into internet legends where fact and fiction blend like sediments in murky water. Photographs of normal-sized anacondas become evidence of prehistoric survivors, while video footage shot at deceptive angles creates proof of impossibly large serpents. The digital age has democratized mythology, allowing anyone with a camera and an imagination to contribute to the growing legend of anacondas as monsters rather than simply successful predators. But the deepest human fears predate all recorded mythology, reaching back to neurological programming that evolved when early primates shared African forests with massive pythons. The sight of a large constrictor triggers responses written in DNA, activating fight-or-flight systems that operate below the level of conscious thought. My mere presence in the water awakens ancestral memories of a time when serpents represented existential threat rather than ecological wonder. The Yanomami shamans understand this primal fear, but transform it into respectful acknowledgement of natural power. Their rituals include offerings to the great anacondas, recognizing our role as guardians of the water spirits and mediators between the human world and the deeper forces that govern river ecosystems. We appear in their ayahuasca visions as both protectors and destroyers, embodying the dual nature of life force itself. Colonial period accounts invariably exaggerate our size and ferocity, describing anacondas as 40 feet long with appetites for human flesh. These early European observers, lacking scientific training and filtered through cultural lenses that viewed tropical nature as inherently hostile, created literary foundations for serpent mythology that persist in modern popular culture. Their fear-based narratives served imperial purposes by portraying indigenous lands as dangerous wilderness requiring civilized intervention. River traders from the era of steam navigation contribute their own layer to anaconda mythology. Stories told in riverside cantinas, where alcohol and imagination combined to transform routine wildlife encounters into epic battles between man and monster. The anaconda becomes a symbol for the untamable nature of South American rivers, a reminder that human dominance over natural environments remains incomplete despite technological advancement. The psychological impact of anaconda encounters extends beyond simple predator fear to touch deeper anxieties about consumption and digestion. The snake that swallows prey whole represents the ultimate loss of bodily autonomy, a fear that manifests in nightmare imagery across cultures that have never experienced actual anaconda contact. The constrictor embodies death through suffocation and absorption, fears that resonate with universal human concerns about being overwhelmed by forces beyond individual control. Contemporary wildlife documentaries both demystify and mythologize anacondas, presenting scientific information while using dramatic cinematography that emphasizes our predatory power. The camera creates its own mythology through selective editing and musical soundtracks that transform natural behavior into entertainment spectacle. Educational intention often yields to the commercial imperative of maintaining viewer engagement through carefully manufactured suspense. Local fishing communities maintain practical knowledge of anaconda behavior while simultaneously preserving traditional beliefs about our supernatural aspects. Their children learn both the scientific facts of snake ecology and the cultural stories that embed anacondas in local spiritual frameworks. This dual knowledge system allows coexistence based on both empirical understanding and respectful acknowledgement of symbolic power. The internet age has spawned new categories of anaconda mythology, from conspiracy theories about government cover-ups of giant specimens to pseudo-scientific claims about prehistoric species surviving in remote areas. Social media amplifies every anaconda encounter, transforming routine wildlife interactions into viral content that feeds public fascination with serpentine monsters lurking in exotic locations. Academic herpetology struggles against this mythological momentum, publishing careful research about actual anaconda ecology, while competing with sensationalized media representations that prioritize entertainment over education. The scientific reality of anaconda behavior methodical, energy-efficient, opportunistic lacks the dramatic appeal of monster mythology, creating tension between popular perception and biological fact. Hollywood has appropriated anaconda imagery to represent primal terror in tropical settings, creating film narratives where impossibly large serpents terrorize human characters through supernatural aggression. These fictional anacondas bear no resemblance to actual snake behavior, but serve symbolic functions in stories about humanity's relationship with untamed nature. The cinema anaconda becomes a projection screen for fears about environmental destruction and loss of technological control. Indigenous communities increasingly find themselves serving as translators between scientific and mythological worldviews, helping researchers understand traditional ecological knowledge while explaining modern conservation concepts through cultural frameworks that treat anacondas as spiritual beings deserving respect rather than simply biological specimens, requiring study. The psychological profile of anaconda mythology reveals consistent themes across cultures and time periods: fears of being consumed, anxieties about water as a hostile environment, and recognition of serpentine power as both creative and destructive. The anaconda serves as a repository for human projections about nature's capacity to overwhelm civilization, a role that transcends the actual ecological function of large constrictors in river ecosystems. Tourism built around anaconda encounters creates its own mythology, as guides balance accurate natural history with the dramatic narratives that clients expect from exotic wildlife experiences. The commercial imperative to provide memorable encounters can lead to exaggeration of both anaconda size and aggressive behavior, feeding the mythological cycle that transforms normal predator-prey relationships into entertainment commodities. Conservation efforts must navigate this mythological landscape carefully, using public fascination with giant serpents to generate support for habitat protection, while correcting misconceptions that portray anacondas as monsters rather than keystone species essential to aquatic ecosystem function. The challenge lies in maintaining respect for cultural traditions while promoting scientific understanding of actual anaconda ecology. In the murky waters where reality and legend intersect, I exist simultaneously as biological organism and mythological symbol. My actual presence in the river ecosystem inseparable from the human stories that attempt to contain the mystery of large predators in an increasingly domesticated world. The legends persist not because they accurately describe anaconda behavior, but because they fulfill deeper human needs to acknowledge forces beyond technological control in a natural world that continues to resist complete understanding. Rain returns, floodplain reborn. The first drops arrive like whispered promises, dimpling the surface of my contracted pool with circular ripples that spread outward like visible hope. After months of relentless drought, the atmospheric pressure changes that precede the rainy season create sensations I feel throughout my body, a loosening of tension, a shift in the chemical composition of the air itself, the return of moisture to an environment that had been slowly desiccating under the merciless tropical sun. The clouds gather with deliberate purpose, building from scattered wisps into towering thunderheads that block out the sun and transform the quality of light throughout my territory. The temperature drops several degrees as the cloud cover provides blessed relief from the solar radiation that has been steadily heating the shallow waters to levels that threatened embryonic development. My unborn offspring respond to this thermal relief with increased activity, as if they too sense the approaching salvation. The smell of rain reaches my chemical sensors long before the precipitation itself arrives, carrying the distinctive petrichor that speaks of Earth about to receive life-giving water. This scent awakens responses programmed by millions of years of evolution, triggering physiological changes that prepare my body for the dramatic environmental transformation about to unfold. My metabolism shifts into anticipation mode, conserving energy for the increased activity that will become possible once habitat constraints are lifted. When the downpour finally begins in earnest, it arrives with tropical intensity that transforms the entire character of the ecosystem within hours. Water level in my pool rises perceptibly, the surface area expanding to reclaim shoreline that has been exposed and sunbaked for months. The chemical concentration that characterized the drought period begins to dilute as fresh water dilutes the accumulated minerals and organic compounds that had reached toxic levels during the dry season. The acoustic environment changes dramatically as rain creates its own symphony across the water surface, masking the normal sounds of aquatic life while providing auditory concealment for predators and prey alike. The rhythmic percussion of raindrops creates pressure waves that my lateral line organs interpret as a kind of background static, forcing adaptation in hunting techniques that rely on detecting subtle water disturbances. Runoff from the surrounding landscape brings both opportunities and challenges, as the first flush of stormwater carries accumulated debris, organic matter, and chemical compounds that have concentrated during the dry months. This initial runoff creates turbid conditions that reduce visibility while dramatically altering water chemistry, forcing rapid adaptation from all aquatic organisms as their environment transforms around them. The embryos within my body respond to the changing atmospheric pressure and improved environmental conditions with accelerated development, as if evolution has programmed them to recognize optimal timing for birth. The stress hormones that elevated during the harsh drought period begin to normalize, creating more favorable conditions for the final stages of gestation that will culminate in live birth within the coming weeks. Fish populations that survived the drought in deep refuges begin to disperse throughout the expanding aquatic habitat. Their movements, creating pressure waves and chemical trails that indicate the return of normal prey distribution patterns. Schools that had been compressed into minimal areas now spread across growing territories, restoring the spatial relationships that make efficient hunting possible for large predators. The water temperature begins to stabilize as increased volume creates thermal mass that resists the dramatic daily fluctuations characteristic of shallow drought pools. This thermal stability provides crucial benefits for embryonic development while creating more predictable hunting conditions as prey animals resume normal behavioral patterns rather than the desperate survival strategies forced by extreme environmental stress. Pink river dolphins surface in areas that had been dry land just days earlier, their presence indicating that water levels have risen sufficiently to reconnect previously isolated pools into the continuous aquatic highways that these marine mammals require for movement between territories. Their appearance serves as a biological indicator that the ecosystem is approaching normal flood season configuration. The chemistry of renewal becomes apparent in every breath and taste as the water clears of drought, concentrated toxins, and resumes the more neutral composition that supports diverse aquatic life. Algae blooms that had dominated the ecosystem during low water periods begin to clear as increased flow and volume restore normal nutrient cycling and prevent the stagnation that promotes excessive plant growth. My territorial boundaries, compressed to the margins of tiny refuge pools during the drought, begin to expand as water levels restore access to hunting grounds that had been unavailable for months. The psychological relief of this territorial expansion matches the physical benefits, as the stress of defending minimal resources gives way to the abundance mentality that characterizes successful predators operating in optimal habitat. The return of normal hydrological function brings the return of normal ecological relationships, as species that had been forced into unnatural proximity by drought conditions resume their traditional spatial distributions. Competition pressure decreases as habitat constraints are lifted, allowing each species to resume the territorial and behavioral patterns that optimize survival and reproduction under normal conditions. Migratory species begin to appear as the expanding waterways restore flight corridors and resting areas that were unavailable during the drought. Herons, egrets, and other wading birds establish colonies on newly submerged trees, their presence indicating that the aquatic food webs are robust enough to support additional predatory pressure from species that had been forced to seek resources elsewhere. The forest itself responds to the returning water with visible relief as vegetation stressed by months of drought begins to recover. Trees along the expanding shoreline resume normal photosynthesis and transpiration, contributing to atmospheric humidity that supports the positive feedback loops necessary for sustained rainfall during the wet season. The sound of flowing water returns to the ecosystem as connections re-establish between pools and channels that had been isolated during the drought. This acoustic signature of hydrological connectivity carries psychological as well as practical implications, signaling the restoration of the environmental conditions that support normal anaconda reproduction and territorial behavior. Temperature gradients begin to re-establish throughout the water column as increased depth creates the thermal stratification that provides hunting advantages for large predators capable of exploiting different thermal zones. The uniform heating that characterized shallow drought pools gives way to the complex temperature structure that supports diverse aquatic communities. The first successful hunt in weeks comes as expanded habitat creates opportunities for ambush predation that were impossible during the drought period when prey animals could easily monitor all available escape routes. A young peccary, made overconfident by the abundance of new water sources, provides the protein necessary to support the final weeks of gestation under vastly improved environmental conditions. As water levels continue to rise and the ecosystem transitions from survival mode to abundance mode, I prepare for the birth of my offspring into an environment that will provide them with optimal conditions for survival and growth. The timing of reproduction with the return of favorable habitat represents millions of years of evolutionary fine-tuning, ensuring that the next generation emerges into a world prepared to support their success. The river remembers its own geography as water fills channels carved by countless previous flood cycles, restoring the intricate network of waterways that support the complex ecological relationships essential to sustainable anaconda populations. In the rising waters of renewal, the future unfolds according to patterns as old as the rivers themselves. Birthing in backwater live young, released. The contractions begin in the pre-dawn darkness, rhythmic pressures deep within my body that signal the culmination of 9 months of gestation and the beginning of the most vulnerable period in the anaconda life cycle. Each contraction is felt throughout my 6-meter length as muscles. I rarely consciously begin the ancient process of bringing new life into the world. The timing is perfect: optimal water levels, stable temperatures, and the concealing darkness that will protect both mother and newborns during these critical first hours. I have chosen my birthing site with the meticulous care that survival demands, a shallow backwater protected by overhanging vegetation, warm enough for successful temperature regulation but deep enough to provide escape routes should danger threaten. The water here is clear and well oxygenated, recently refreshed by the returning rains but chemically stable enough to support the delicate physiology of newborn anacondas taking their first breaths. The embryos within my body have been positioning themselves for days, their movements creating internal sensations that announce the approaching birth with increasing urgency. Each offspring, now fully developed at approximately half a meter in length, must navigate the complex anatomy of live birth while competing with dozens of siblings for position in the birth canal. The process is both cooperative and competitive, as successful emergence for each individual depends partly on the coordinated efforts of the entire clutch. The first contraction strong enough to initiate active labor creates a sensation unlike anything else in my experience. Every muscle fiber in my reproductive tract contracts in coordinated waves, creating pressures that guide the first embryo toward emergence while maintaining the precise positioning necessary for successful live birth. My breathing deepens and accelerates as the metabolic demands of labor-strain systems already taxed by months of supporting developing offspring. The chemical environment around my birthing site changes as labor progresses. My stress hormones and the byproducts of intense muscular activity creating scent signatures that could attract predators if detected by sensitive chemical sensors. The isolation of this backwater provides crucial protection during a period when my attention must focus entirely on the birth process rather than territorial defense or predator avoidance. The first neonate emerges as dawn light begins to filter through the overhanging canopy, a perfect miniature anaconda that immediately demonstrates the swimming ability essential for aquatic survival. The umbilical connection parts naturally as the newborn encounters water, triggering the physiological changes necessary for independent respiration and circulation. Within seconds of birth, this tiny predator begins the behaviors that will define its existence, tasting the water with its tongue, reading chemical gradients, positioning itself for optimal survival in an environment filled with both opportunities and threats. The birth process accelerates as subsequent offspring follow established pathways, each emergent slightly easier than the last as my reproductive anatomy adapts to the mechanical demands of multiple live births. The contractions establish a rhythm that coordinates with my breathing and heart rate, creating a biological symphony focused entirely on the successful transition from internal development to independent life. Each newborn anaconda weighs approximately 100 grams and measures 50 centimeters in length, but despite their small size, they possess fully functional sensory systems and predatory instincts honed by millions of years of evolution. Their scales shimmer with the perfect patterns that will provide camouflage in their aquatic environment, while their eyes already show the alertness necessary for detecting both prey and predators in the complex underwater landscape they must now navigate alone. The water around the birthing site becomes clouded with amniotic fluid and the detritus of multiple births, creating a temporary chemical signature that announces recent reproduction to any creature capable of reading such information. This unavoidable advertisement of vulnerable newborns represents one of the most dangerous aspects of anaconda reproduction, as many predators specifically seek out birthing areas to feed on helpless offspring. My maternal behavior during the birth process balances the physiological demands of labor with the defensive vigilance necessary to protect emerging offspring from immediate threats. Each contraction requires my full attention, yet I must maintain awareness of the surrounding environment where herons, caimans, large fish, and other predators might exploit this period of vulnerability to attack either myself or my newborns. The 28th neonate emerges as the morning sun reaches sufficient strength to begin warming the shallow birthing waters, creating optimal thermal conditions for the newborn's first hours of independent life. Each offspring immediately begins the behaviors that will determine survival, swimming to concealed positions among aquatic vegetation, testing the water for chemical information about food sources and threats, positioning themselves for the patient hunting that characterizes successful anaconda predation, even at this miniature scale. The final phase of labor produces the last 6 offspring in rapid succession, as if my body recognizes the approaching end of this exhausting process and accelerates completion. The birth of 34 living anacondas represents extraordinary reproductive success, though the survival rate through the first year will be determined by factors ranging from predation pressure to food availability to individual genetic fitness. Post-birth recovery begins immediately as my reproductive anatomy returns to its normal configuration and my metabolism shifts from the specialized demands of pregnancy and labor to the requirements of postpartum healing and the eventual resumption of normal predatory activity. The physical relief of no longer carrying 34 developing offspring is offset by the maternal stress of knowing that dozens of vulnerable descendants now face the harsh realities of survival in an environment where Anaconda mortality approaches 90% in the first year of life. The newborns scatter throughout the birthing area according to instinctive patterns that maximize survival probability through spatial distribution. Clustering together would create easy targets for predators, while excessive dispersal would prevent the limited protection available from maternal presence during these crucial first hours. Each offspring follows genetic programming that balances independence with proximity to the birth site. My own behavior shifts into the defensive posture that characterizes maternal anacondas during the brief period when newborn protection overrides normal territorial and predatory concerns. Any disturbance in the water receives immediate aggressive investigation, while my chemical monitoring intensifies to detect approaching threats before they can endanger the scattered offspring. This hypervigilant state represents a temporary but complete transformation of behavioral priorities. The chemical signature of birth attracts scavengers within hours, as catfish and other opportunistic feeders detect the organic compounds associated with live birth and begin searching for afterbirth and other nutrients. This scavenger activity creates additional water disturbance that can mask the movements of more dangerous predators, forcing constant vigilance during a period when maternal energy reserves are already depleted by the tremendous effort of live birth. Temperature regulation becomes critical for newborn survival, as their small size makes them vulnerable to thermal extremes that adult anacondas can easily tolerate. The shallow, sun-warmed waters of the birthing area provide optimal conditions for newborn thermoregulation, but this same warmth also supports bacterial growth that could threaten offspring with limited immune system development. As the day progresses and the newborns demonstrate increasing independence through successful small-scale hunting and effective predator avoidance, the natural process of family dissolution begins. Maternal protection behavior gradually gives way to the normal territorial and predatory instincts that define adult anaconda existence, while the offspring disperse more widely as their survival capabilities develop. The birthing site, its purpose fulfilled, gradually returns to normal chemical and physical conditions as the evidence of reproduction disperses into the broader aquatic environment. Within days, only the subtlest traces will remain to mark this location as the birthplace of 34 new apex predators, each carrying the genetic heritage necessary to continue the ancient lineage of anacondas in these waters. In the warming waters of the backwater nursery, the eternal cycle of anaconda reproduction completes another successful iteration, adding a new generation to the river ecosystem while beginning the long process of individual survival that will determine which offspring inherit the territorial waters that have sustained their lineage for millions of years. Guardian in the grass, postpartum vigil. The transformation from reproductive vessel to protective guardian occurs within hours of the last birth, as ancient maternal instincts override the normal territorial behaviors that define solitary anaconda existence. For the next 48 hours, my entire behavioral repertoire will be dedicated to maximizing offspring survival during the most vulnerable period of the anaconda life cycle, when tiny predators must learn to navigate an environment filled with creatures eager to consume them. My positioning in the shallow grass beds reflects a careful calculation of defensive advantages and escape routes. The dense aquatic vegetation provides concealment for scattered newborns while offering multiple pathways for rapid movement should threats materialize. Water depth remains optimal for newborn swimming ability, while being shallow enough to allow my massive form to maneuver effectively in defense of offspring that might be attacked by aerial or aquatic predators. The behavioral paradox of maternal anaconda protection becomes apparent as I must balance aggressive defense against numerous small threats with the careful monitoring necessary to avoid accidentally harming my own offspring through excessive defensive activity. Each movement through the grass beds requires awareness of tiny forms that could be crushed by careless positioning of my 200-kilogram body mass. My chemical monitoring reaches hyperacute levels as stress hormones enhance sensory sensitivity, while parental instincts focus attention on detecting threats to offspring rather than hunting opportunities for myself. The water around the nursery area becomes a complex chemical landscape where I can distinguish between the scent signatures of individual newborns and the approaching threat profiles of potential predators drawn by the vulnerability of recently born anacondas. The first serious threat appears as a great blue heron stalking through the shallows with the patient deliberation that makes these birds such effective predators of small aquatic animals. Its movements create pressure waves that my lateral line organs detect long before visual contact, allowing me to position defensively while maintaining concealment among the vegetation. The heron's presence triggers aggressive responses that would be suicidal under normal circumstances, but become essential when offspring survival is at stake. My defensive display toward the heron involves rising partially from the water in a threat posture that announces the presence of a large, aggressive anaconda willing to attack any creature that threatens the nursery area. The heron, recognizing the hopelessness of attempting to feed in the presence of an aroused maternal anaconda, retreats to hunt elsewhere. This interaction establishes a defensive perimeter that other predators will learn to respect through direct confrontation or observation of similar encounters. The newborns respond to these defensive activities with increased concealment behavior, instinctively recognizing that maternal aggression indicates elevated threat levels requiring maximum caution. Their small size allows them to hide in vegetation that would not conceal larger animals, while their perfect camouflage makes detection difficult even for predators actively searching for anaconda offspring. This coordinated response between maternal defense and offspring concealment maximizes survival probability during these critical hours. Hunting behavior completely ceases during the maternal protection period, as the energy expenditure and distraction involved in capturing and consuming prey would compromise offspring defense. My body begins metabolizing fat reserves accumulated during pregnancy to sustain the high-energy defensive behaviors required for successful offspring protection. This fasting period represents a significant metabolic challenge, but reflects the evolutionary priority placed on reproductive success over individual survival needs. A small caiman approaches the nursery area during the hottest part of the day, its thermal signature indicating a juvenile specimen perhaps 1 meter in length. Under normal circumstances, this would represent a territorial nuisance rather than a serious threat, but the presence of vulnerable offspring transforms any predator into a potential disaster. My response involves direct confrontation rather than the mutual avoidance that typically characterizes anaconda-caiman interactions. The confrontation with the juvenile caiman demonstrates the temporary inversion of normal predator hierarchies that occurs during maternal protection periods. Size and normal territorial dominance become secondary to the fierce determination that drives maternal defense behavior. The caiman retreats rapidly when faced with an obviously aggressive anaconda whose behavior indicates willingness to engage in potentially lethal combat over territorial access. Acoustic monitoring becomes as important as chemical detection during the protection period, as many threats to newborn anacondas approach through the air rather than water. The distinctive flight sounds of fish-eating birds allow early detection and appropriate defensive positioning, while the splash patterns of different aquatic predators provide information about threat level and optimal response strategies. The psychological stress of constant vigilance during the protection period affects every aspect of my physiology, from elevated heart rate to altered digestive function to enhanced sensory acuity. These changes reflect the extraordinary metabolic cost of maternal behavior in a species that normally operates as a solitary predator, focused entirely on individual survival rather than protection of vulnerable offspring. Small predatory fish represent persistent but manageable threats that require constant monitoring rather than aggressive confrontation. Large carrakins and small catfish patrol the edges of the nursery area, seeking opportunities to capture unwary newborns but avoiding direct confrontation with the maternal presence they instinctively recognize as dangerous. My positioning and movement patterns must account for these smaller threats while maintaining readiness for more serious challenges. The gradual development of newborn independence becomes apparent as successful feeding attempts increase and predator avoidance behaviors become more sophisticated. Each small success in newborn survival validates the enormous energy expenditure involved in maternal protection, while building confidence that offspring dispersal can occur without catastrophic mortality rates. Night brings different challenges as nocturnal predators begin hunting activities focused on small, vulnerable prey. Owls and bats create acoustic signatures that indicate aerial threats, while nocturnal mammals may approach the water to hunt for anaconda offspring. The darkness that normally provides hunting advantages for anacondas becomes a liability during maternal protection, when visual detection of threats becomes more difficult. Temperature regulation during the protection period involves maintaining optimal conditions for newborn survival while managing the metabolic demands of constant vigilance. The warm, shallow waters that support newborn development also increase bacterial growth rates and metabolic demands on maternal physiology already stressed by recent birth and defensive behaviors. By the second day of protection, signs of newborn dispersal begin to appear as the most robust offspring venture beyond the immediate nursery area in search of individual territories and hunting opportunities. This natural dispersal reduces the concentration of vulnerable targets while indicating that maternal protection has successfully bridged the gap between helpless birth and viable independent existence. The ending of the protection period occurs gradually as offspring dispersal reaches levels where concentrated defense becomes less effective than resumed individual hunting. Maternal instincts gradually yield to the normal territorial and predatory behaviors that define adult anaconda existence, while the surviving offspring begin their independent lives carrying genetic programming and learned behaviors that will determine their success in the challenging environment of the river ecosystem. The nursery area, its purpose fulfilled, slowly returns to normal ecological function as the chemical signatures of birth and defense disperse into the broader aquatic environment. The grass beds that provided crucial protection during the most vulnerable period of anaconda life resume their role as habitat for the diverse community of species that depend on shallow water vegetation for survival and reproduction. In the quiet aftermath of successful maternal protection, the river ecosystem absorbs a new generation of apex predators, while the exhausted mother begins the long process of recovery that will eventually restore her to full predatory capability and prepare her for future reproductive cycles in the eternal dance of survival and renewal that defines life in these ancient waters. Losing length to time, aging muscle, scar tissue, 23 years of existence in these waters have carved their story into my body like annual rings in ancient trees. Each successful hunt, each territorial battle, each reproductive cycle has left its mark on scales and muscle, creating a living record of adaptation and survival that speaks to both the triumphs and costs of apex predator existence. The 6-meter length that once represented pure predatory efficiency now carries the accumulated weight of decades in an environment where every day demands perfect performance for survival. The scars tell individual stories of encounters that tested the limits of anaconda durability. 3 parallel lines along my left flank mark the claws of a jaguar that miscalculated its attack angle during a territorial dispute 7 years ago. The pale patches near my tail record an encounter with a caiman whose death roll nearly severed muscle groups that took months to heal properly. Each mark represents a moment when survival balanced on the edge of a knife, decided by fractions of seconds and millimeters of positioning. My movement through water has become subtly different as collagen fibers stiffen and joint flexibility decreases with accumulated wear. The effortless undulation that once carried me through hunting approaches with supernatural silence now requires conscious effort to achieve similar levels of stealth. Younger anacondas would detect these changes immediately, recognizing the opportunity to challenge territorial boundaries that age makes more difficult to defend effectively. The metabolic changes that accompany aging affect every aspect of predatory performance, from digestion efficiency to strike speed. Food processing takes longer as stomach acid production decreases and muscular contractions lose some of their former power. The perfect fuel efficiency that allowed weeks between meals during my prime now requires more frequent feeding to maintain optimal body condition, creating increased pressure to hunt successfully, despite diminished physical capabilities. My thermal regulation has become less precise, as the circulatory efficiency that once maintained perfect temperature control through various water conditions shows the effects of decades of use. Cold periods require longer basking sessions to achieve optimal muscle function, while extreme heat creates fatigue more quickly than in previous years. These thermal management challenges force adaptation in daily activity patterns and territorial use. The sensory systems that define anaconda hunting success remain largely intact, but the neural processing speed that once turned chemical information into instantaneous tactical decisions now operates with microscopic delays that could prove crucial during high-stakes predatory encounters. My tongue still reads water chemistry with perfect accuracy, but the analysis and response time shows the subtle degradation that accumulates with neural aging. Hunting success rates have declined gradually over the past 3 years, as the physical demands of ambush predation exceed the capabilities of aging muscle and connective tissue. Strikes that once generated irresistible coiling power now sometimes fall short of complete prey subjugation, allowing smaller or more agile targets to escape from attacks that would have been certain kills during my prime years. The reproductive burden of recent breeding cycles has accelerated some aspects of physical aging, as the enormous energy demands of gestation and offspring protection depleted nutritional reserves that previous generations of eggs, or live, young had not required. Each successful reproductive cycle represents a trade-off between genetic continuation and individual longevity that becomes more pronounced as physical resources become more limited. Territorial boundaries that I once maintained through demonstration of overwhelming force now require more diplomatic approaches as neighboring anacondas test the limits of an aging queen's defensive capabilities. The psychological adaptation to these changing power dynamics requires acceptance of gradually contracting territorial claims while maximizing the defensive value of remaining prime habitat. Memory becomes both asset and limitation, as decades of experience in these waters provide unmatched knowledge of seasonal patterns, prey behavior, and optimal hunting locations. This accumulated wisdom compensates for declining physical capabilities by allowing more efficient use of available energy, but the neural pathways that store these memories show their own signs of aging in occasional lapses and slower information retrieval. The healing process that once restored damaged tissue to perfect function now leaves permanent reminders of injury in the form of scar tissue that affects flexibility and movement patterns. Recent wounds heal more slowly and completely, while old injuries ache during weather changes with the persistence of accumulated damage that younger tissue could repair without lasting effect. Joint stiffness becomes apparent during the daily movements required for territorial patrol and hunting activity. The vertebral column that once flexed with infinite precision now shows limitations in extreme bending angles, while the muscular contractions that generate coiling power must work harder to achieve the same results that once came effortlessly. Predator avoidance strategies must adapt to acknowledge increased vulnerability as aging affects the escape responses that could mean the difference between survival and death when encountering jaguars, large caimans, or human threats. Routes that once provided adequate escape options now require more careful evaluation based on realistic assessment of current rather than historical capabilities. The social dynamics of anaconda territoriality shift as age-related changes become apparent to potential competitors who might attempt to claim prime habitat from a predator whose defensive capabilities may be declining. These challenges require strategic responses that conserve energy while maintaining essential territorial boundaries through psychological rather than purely physical dominance. Behavioral adaptations to aging include increased selectivity in prey choice, focusing on targets that offer optimal nutrition-to-effort ratios rather than the opportunistic hunting that characterized younger years. This efficiency-focused approach to predation reflects the wisdom of experience applied to the practical limitations of aging physiology. The accumulated knowledge of water-level patterns, seasonal prey movements, and optimal hunting conditions becomes increasingly valuable as physical capabilities decline, allowing strategic positioning and timing to compensate for reduced strike speed and coiling power. This represents the triumph of experience over youthful vigor in the ongoing challenge of successful predation. Stress responses that once provided emergency capability during life-threatening encounters now trigger more slowly and sustain for shorter periods, reflecting the wear on physiological systems that have responded to countless emergencies over more than 2 decades of existence. This reduction in stress capacity requires more careful risk assessment and conflict avoidance. The cellular-level changes that define biological aging affect everything from scale production to immune system function, creating subtle but cumulative impacts on overall health and survival probability. Wound healing becomes less efficient, while disease resistance shows gradual decline that makes environmental stresses more challenging to survive. Despite these accumulating limitations, the aged anaconda retains formidable capabilities that reflect the robust engineering of apex predator physiology. Many hunting skills improve with experience, even as physical capabilities decline, while territorial knowledge and predator recognition abilities reach peak efficiency during the mature years when survival depends increasingly on wisdom rather than raw physical power. In the deepening waters of another successful flood season, I represent both the triumph of long survival and the inevitable reality of biological aging in creatures whose existence demands perfection from systems that gradually wear with use. The river that has sustained me for over 2 decades continues its eternal flow, carrying new generations of predators while supporting the accumulated wisdom of those who have learned to adapt as time transforms strength into strategy. Parasites with fangs, leeches, mites, fungal threats. The microscopic warfare that rages across my body represents a constant battle between my immune system and the countless organisms that view my massive form as prime real estate for their own survival and reproduction. After decades in these pathogen-rich waters, my scales, skin, and internal organs have become a complex ecosystem where beneficial bacteria compete with harmful parasites in an ongoing struggle that affects every aspect of my daily existence. The leeches are perhaps the most visible of my unwelcome companions, their dark, segmented bodies attached to areas where my scales offer less protection or blood flow is particularly rich. These blood-feeding annelids position themselves with parasitic precision along my belly, around my cloaca, and in the sensitive areas near my eyes where their feeding activity creates constant irritation. Each leech represents a slow but steady drain on my nutritional resources, extracting blood that could otherwise support healing, hunting, or reproductive activities. The aquatic mites that infest my scale pockets create their own category of torment, burrowing into the spaces between scales where their feeding and reproductive activities cause persistent inflammation and potential secondary infections. These microscopic arthropods multiply rapidly in the warm, moist environment created by my aquatic lifestyle, their populations exploding during periods when my immune system is stressed by injury, pregnancy, or environmental challenges. Fungal infections present perhaps the most serious parasitic threat, as various species of aquatic fungi attempt to establish colonies on and within my tissues. The humid conditions of tropical waters provide perfect growing conditions for these organisms, while any break in my scale coverage creates an entry point for fungal spores that can cause deep tissue infections if not controlled by immune responses. Some fungal species produce toxins that affect my nervous system, creating subtle changes in behavior or reflexes that could prove fatal during predatory encounters. The internal parasites represent an invisible army of nematodes, tapeworms, and protozoans that have evolved specifically to exploit anaconda physiology. These organisms affect everything from nutrient absorption to blood chemistry, creating systemic effects that reduce hunting efficiency while increasing vulnerability to environmental stresses. The delicate balance between parasite load and immune response determines whether these internal invaders remain manageable nuisances or develop into life-threatening infestations. Bacterial infections complicate the parasitic landscape by taking advantage of tissue damage created by larger parasites, leading to secondary infections that can overwhelm even robust immune responses. The warm, stagnant waters that sometimes characterize dry season pools provide perfect breeding conditions for pathogenic bacteria that enter through wounds created by leeches, mites, or mechanical injuries from territorial conflicts. My behavioral adaptations to parasitic pressure include seeking out specific aquatic plants whose chemical compounds provide natural antiparasitic benefits. Certain algae and water plants produce substances that discourage leech attachment or inhibit fungal growth, leading to feeding behaviors that serve medicinal rather than purely nutritional purposes. These self-medication behaviors represent millions of years of evolutionary learning about managing parasitic loads through environmental resources. The immune system responses that combat parasitic infections require enormous energy expenditure that competes with other biological processes for limited resources. During periods of high parasitic pressure, my body diverts nutrients from growth, reproduction, or healing toward the production of white blood cells, antibodies, and other immune factors necessary to maintain the delicate balance between host and parasite populations. Grooming behaviors take on critical importance as mechanical removal of external parasites becomes essential for preventing population explosions that could overwhelm my defensive capabilities. The careful rubbing against rough surfaces, strategic movement through vegetation, and selective feeding on fish species known to clean parasites from larger animals all contribute to parasite management strategies that must be maintained constantly. The seasonal patterns of parasitic infections follow environmental cycles, with certain species becoming more problematic during specific water level or temperature conditions. Dry season concentration in small pools creates ideal transmission conditions for many parasites, while flood season dispersal can reduce parasitic pressure, but also expose me to new species carried from distant watersheds by expanding water connections. The relationship between parasitic load and aging becomes apparent as decades of accumulated infections create chronic inflammation that affects tissue healing and regeneration. Scar tissue formation is influenced by previous parasitic damage, while immune system exhaustion from constant parasitic challenges reduces effectiveness against new infections or environmental pathogens. Some parasitic relationships approach mutualism as certain organisms provide benefits that partially offset their costs to my health. Specific bacterial populations in my digestive tract assist with breaking down difficult prey items while competing with more harmful microorganisms for resources. These beneficial parasites represent evolutionary compromises where controlled infection provides advantages over complete parasite elimination. The chemical warfare between my immune system and invasive organisms creates detectable changes in my scent signature that can affect both prey and predator interactions. Sick anacondas smell different from healthy ones, potentially making them more vulnerable to attack from competitors, while also alerting prey animals to the presence of a compromised predator whose hunting efficiency may be reduced. Wound healing becomes significantly more complex in the presence of persistent parasitic infections, as the immune resources needed to fight established parasite populations compete with the cellular processes required for tissue repair. This creates dangerous vulnerabilities during territorial conflicts or predatory encounters where rapid healing could mean the difference between survival and death. The reproductive implications of parasitic infections include effects on embryonic development when maternal parasites compete with developing offspring for nutrients or produce toxins that cross into embryonic circulation. Severe parasitic loads can lead to reproductive failure, smaller offspring, or developmental abnormalities that reduce survival probability for the next generation. Environmental stress factors such as pollution, habitat degradation, or climate change can tip the balance between manageable parasitic loads and overwhelming infections by compromising immune system function, while creating conditions that favor parasitic reproduction and transmission. These interactions between environmental and biological stressors represent emerging threats to apex predator survival. The microscopic predators that exploit my body represent their own evolutionary success stories, highly specialized organisms that have adapted to survive within the hostile environment of an anaconda's immune system, while extracting the resources needed for their own survival and reproduction. From their perspective, I am not a predator, but rather a mobile ecosystem that provides everything needed for parasitic success. Treatment-seeking behaviors include deliberate exposure to water currents that physically remove external parasites, selection of resting sites with specific mineral compositions that discourage parasitic growth, and consumption of prey species, whose tissues contain natural antiparasitic compounds. These behaviors represent the accumulation of evolutionary wisdom about managing parasitic pressure through environmental manipulation. The energy balance between parasitic costs and immune responses must be carefully managed to avoid the immune system exhaustion that can lead to catastrophic parasitic overgrowth. This biological balancing act requires constant adjustment based on environmental conditions, nutritional status, stress levels, and the specific composition of parasitic communities present at any given time. In the complex ecosystem that exists on and within my body, the ancient arms race between host and parasite continues according to evolutionary principles that predate the development of complex life forms. Success in this microscopic warfare often determines whether the larger battles for territory, prey, and reproductive success can be fought effectively in the broader arena of aquatic predator existence. Final hunt of the season, taking down a caiman. The decision to attempt this hunt represents a calculation that balances desperation against capability, as my aging body faces the reality that easy prey has become increasingly scarce, while my nutritional needs remain as demanding as ever. The juvenile black caiman basking on a partially submerged log represents both opportunity and extreme risk, enough protein to sustain me through several weeks of recovery, but also a predator whose defensive capabilities could inflict injuries that my aging physiology might not survive. The caiman measures approximately 2 meters in length, young enough to lack the bone-crushing bite force of a mature adult but old enough to possess formidable defensive weaponry in the form of powerful jaws, sharp teeth, and a muscular tail capable of delivering devastating blows. Its positioning on the log provides both advantage and vulnerability, elevated enough to survey its surroundings for threats, but also committed to a location that limits escape routes should an attack materialize from the water below. My approach requires every technique learned through decades of successful predation, as the margin for error in hunting another apex predator approaches zero. The slightest disturbance in the water, the smallest miscalculation in timing or positioning, could alert the caiman to danger and initiate a violent confrontation where victory is far from guaranteed. My movements through the water become meditations in stealth, as I position myself for a strike that must be both perfectly timed and overwhelming in its initial impact. The chemical analysis of the water around the caiman's basking site reveals stress hormones that indicate an animal already alert to potential threats. Recent territorial disputes with other caimans have elevated its cortisol levels, while sharpening reflexes that could detect the approach of even a supremely skilled anaconda. This heightened alertness forces adaptation in my hunting strategy, requiring even greater patience and precision than normal predatory encounters. My aging joints protest the prolonged positioning required for optimal strike angle, as arthritis accumulated over 2 decades of violent encounters creates stiffness that must be overcome through careful warm-up movements and strategic use of thermal currents to maintain muscle flexibility. The perfect coiling that once came effortlessly now requires conscious effort and energy expenditure that reduces the total power available for the crucial initial strike. The caiman's behavior patterns reveal a young predator, confident in its own defensive capabilities, but lacking the experience that would make it aware of the specific threat posed by a large anaconda. Its periodic head movements follow predictable patterns as it monitors for aerial predators and competing caimans, while remaining relatively inattentive to aquatic threats approaching from directly below its basking position. My strike timing must account for the reduced speed that aging has imposed on my attack reflexes, requiring earlier commitment to the attack sequence, while accepting increased risk of detection during the extended approach phase. The explosive power that once guaranteed successful prey capture now operates at perhaps 80% of its former capability, making precision positioning even more critical for overwhelming initial impact. The water depth at the strike point provides barely adequate maneuvering room for my 6-meter length, forcing body positioning that compromises some coiling efficiency in exchange for the concealment necessary to achieve surprise. Every meter of my length must be positioned with tactical precision as the confined space eliminates options for repositioning should the initial attack fail to achieve complete control of the caiman. The moment of commitment arrives as the caiman shifts position on its basking log, presenting the optimal strike angle for perhaps 3 seconds before changing to a more defensive posture. My body explodes upward through the water column with every remaining fiber of predatory power, jaws opening wide to engulf the caiman's midsection, while my coils begin the complex process of achieving the crushing grip that will determine the outcome of this encounter. The caiman's response is immediate and violent, its jaws snapping toward my head, while its powerful tail whips around in search of vulnerable targets along my extended body. The defensive strength of a 2-meter caiman exceeds anything I have encountered since my prime hunting years, requiring adaptations in coiling technique that account for both the prey's resistance and my own reduced crushing power. The battle becomes a test of endurance as much as strength, with my aging cardiovascular system working at maximum capacity to supply oxygen to muscles engaged in sustained maximum effort. Each breath becomes precious as the caiman's struggles force constant readjustment of my coiling position, while my grip gradually tightens around its torso in the methodical process that will eventually overcome its resistance. The caiman's teeth find purchase along my flank, creating lacerations that would have been minor concerns during my prime years, but now represent serious threats to an aging predator whose healing capabilities have diminished significantly. Blood loss and tissue damage accumulate as the struggle continues, requiring rapid resolution before my injuries compromise the strength needed to maintain crushing pressure. My technique adapts to leverage experience over raw power, using knowledge gained from dozens of similar encounters to predict the caiman's defensive movements and position my coils for maximum mechanical advantage. The wisdom of age begins to compensate for declining physical capabilities as tactical expertise guides the application of available strength with surgical precision. The crushing phase of the attack proceeds more slowly than in previous years, as my muscular contractions must work harder to overcome the caiman's resistance while managing the energy expenditure that could lead to premature exhaustion. Each increment of increased pressure must be maintained while preparing for the next phase of compression, creating a methodical process that tests the limits of aging anaconda endurance. The caiman's struggles gradually weaken as oxygen deprivation and circulatory restriction take their inexorable toll, but the process requires nearly 20 minutes of sustained effort that leaves my own systems operating at dangerous stress levels. Heart rate, breathing, and muscle lactate all reach levels that would have been easily managed during my prime, but now approach the threshold of physiological sustainability. The final moments of the struggle arrive as the caiman's defensive responses fade to occasional twitches, indicating the approach of circulatory failure and neural shutdown. My own energy reserves have been depleted to dangerous levels, requiring careful management of the remaining strength needed to maintain pressure until death is confirmed and consumption can begin. Victory comes at a price that reflects both the success of experience-guided predation and the reality of aging apex predator physiology. The caiman represents weeks of nutritional security, but the injuries sustained during capture will require extended healing time, while the energy debt created by maximum effort hunting may take days to repay through careful metabolism management. The consumption process proceeds more slowly than in previous years, as jaw flexibility and digestive efficiency show the effects of decades of use, while the mechanical demands of swallowing a 2-meter caiman test the limits of aging anaconda anatomy. Each phase of the feeding process requires conscious effort and energy management that once occurred automatically. In the aftermath of successful predation against a dangerous opponent, I embody both the triumph of accumulated hunting wisdom and the sobering reality of physical decline that eventually limits even the most successful apex predators. The river flows around my resting form as I begin the long process of digesting victory earned through the perfect application of experience to overcome the limitations that time has imposed on predatory capability. This hunt may represent the culmination of my career as an active predator of dangerous prey, the final demonstration that age and experience can still prevail against younger, stronger opponents when wisdom guides the application of remaining strength with tactical precision born from decades of survival in these unforgiving waters. Moonlow calls a return to silence. The waxing gibbous moon casts silver pathways across the still water as I rest in the deepest part of my territory, the massive caiman slowly dissolving within my digestive tract while my body recovers from what may have been my final hunt of truly dangerous prey. The lunar light creates an ethereal landscape where reality blurs with memory, and I find myself suspended between the active predator I have been and the ancient repository of river wisdom I am becoming. My breathing has slowed to perhaps 6 breaths per minute, each inhalation a meditation on the rhythm that has sustained me through 24 years of existence in these waters. The oxygen travels through my body with deliberate efficiency, supporting the minimal metabolic functions required for digestion and healing, while my consciousness drifts in the liminal space between sleep and awareness that characterizes the deepest phases of Anaconda rest. The water around me holds the chemical signatures of a lifetime spent in territorial dominance, me own scent markers accumulated over decades of successful hunting, reproduction, and survival. These molecular memories create an olfactory autobiography that tells the story of an apex predator who has seen the river through flood and drought, abundance and scarcity, youth and the approaching shadows of age. The moonlight penetrates the water column in shifting beams that illuminate the underwater landscape, like nature's own cathedral, revealing the familiar geography of fallen logs, root tangles, and silt formations that have defined my territory for the past decade. Each landmark holds memories of successful hunts, territorial disputes, or quiet moments of rest that collectively comprise the accumulated experience of a master predator. My scales reflect the lunar radiance with subtle iridescence, creating patterns of light and shadow that speak to the perfect camouflage that has made me virtually invisible to countless prey animals over the years. The reflection creates a doubled image, the physical anaconda resting in the depths and its luminous twin suspended in the silvered surface above, like a bridge between the tangible world and the realm of legend. The forest chorus that accompanies these nocturnal hours has become as familiar as my own heartbeat, the territorial calls of howler monkeys in the distant canopy, the splash of fish feeding at the surface, the rustle of night birds moving through riverside vegetation. These sounds create an acoustic landscape that has remained essentially unchanged throughout my lifetime, a constant backdrop to the cycle of seasons and years that define river existence. My digestive system works with the methodical efficiency of organs that have processed hundreds of successful hunts, breaking down the caiman's tissues with acids and enzymes refined through decades of evolutionary perfection. The process creates internal warmth that radiates through my body like a slow fire, maintaining optimal temperature despite the cooling night air above the water surface. The memories that surface during these deep rest periods span the entirety of my existence from the vulnerable early years, when every day brought life-threatening challenges to the territorial prime, when my dominance seemed absolute and eternal. Each memory carries its own chemical signature, neural pathways worn smooth by repeated activation that allows perfect recall of hunting successes, reproductive encounters, and survival challenges that shaped my development into the apex predator I became. The young anacondas I birthed months ago have dispersed throughout the river system, carrying my genetic legacy into waters I may never explore myself. Their survival or failure will determine whether my bloodline continues into future generations, but the immediate maternal concerns that once drove protective behaviors have faded into acceptance of natural selection's harsh arithmetic. Success for my offspring will be measured by their own abilities rather than continued parental intervention. The territorial boundaries that once required constant vigilance and occasional violent defense have stabilized into a pattern of mutual respect, with neighboring predators who recognize both my capabilities and my limitations. The young anacondas and caimans who might have challenged my territorial claims during earlier years now maintain respectful distances, reading the chemical and behavioral signals that announce the presence of an experienced predator whose defeat would require costs few competitors are willing to pay. The philosophy of patience that defines successful anaconda existence reaches its ultimate expression during these moonlit meditations, where time becomes fluid and the boundary between individual consciousness and universal river mind grows thin. I exist simultaneously as a specific biological organism and as a representative of my species' accumulated wisdom, carrying within my neural networks the distilled knowledge of 40 million years of anaconda evolution. My heartbeat synchronizes with rhythms larger than individual physiology, the seasonal pulse of flood and drought, the generational cycle of birth and death, the geological tempo of river, meandering that carves new channels while abandoning old ones. These nested rhythms create a temporal symphony where my personal existence becomes one movement in an endless composition of environmental change and biological adaptation. The water temperature has dropped several degrees since sunset, requiring subtle adjustments in my positioning to maintain optimal metabolic function while conserving the energy needed for continued digestion. These thermoregulatory behaviors have become automatic through decades of practice, my body reading environmental conditions and responding with micro-movements that optimize comfort and efficiency without conscious direction. The chemical environment of my resting place tells stories of the broader ecosystem's nocturnal activities, the passage of river dolphins hunting in distant channels, the territorial markings of otters establishing social hierarchies, the stress pheromones of prey animals navigating the dangerous hours when most predators are most active. This chemical intelligence network connects me to ecological events occurring throughout the watershed, despite my current immobility. The lunar cycle that governs tidal rhythms in distant oceans also influences the behavior of river species through mechanisms that science is only beginning to understand. Fish spawning, insect emergence, and mammalian reproductive cycles all show correlations with lunar phases that suggest evolutionary adaptations to celestial rhythms that predate terrestrial life. My own biological clocks respond to these same cosmic influences through pathways programmed by millions of years of nocturnal existence. The silence between sounds becomes as meaningful as the sounds themselves during these deep rest periods, creating spaces where consciousness can expand beyond the immediate demands of survival into contemplation of existence itself. The anaconda mind, normally focused with laser intensity on prey detection and threat assessment, relaxes into a broader awareness that encompasses the entire ecosystem as a living, breathing entity of which I am merely one component. My position in the water column places me at the interface between the oxygenated surface layers and the anaerobic depths, a boundary zone that mirrors my own existence at the intersection between life and death, activity and rest, individual identity and species consciousness. This positioning allows optimal gas exchange while maintaining connection to the deep currents that carry information from throughout the river system. The approaching dawn will bring return to the normal cycles of territorial maintenance, hunting assessment, and survival calculation that define active anaconda existence. But these nocturnal interludes provide essential restoration not just for physical systems, but for the consciousness that must integrate decades of sensory experience into the wisdom needed for continued survival in an environment that offers no guarantees to even the most successful predators. In the moonlit cathedral of my deepest resting place, I become both witness and participant in the eternal river meditation that transforms individual organisms into carriers of evolutionary wisdom, biological vessels for the accumulated knowledge that flows like water through generations of successful adaptation to the challenges and opportunities of aquatic existence. Shallow grave death beneath the roots. The weakness arrives like a slow tide, creeping through my body with the inexorable advance of systems that have finally reached the limits of their repair capabilities. 25 years of existence as an apex predator have accumulated cellular damage that even my robust physiology can no longer overcome, and I feel the ancient machinery of life beginning its final shutdown in the familiar waters that have been my home for more than 2 decades. The strangler fig, that will become my final resting place, has grown from a seedling I remember observing during my territorial prime into a massive tree whose aerial roots now plunge deep into the riverbed like living pillars. The irony of seeking shelter beneath a plant that kills its host trees through slow strangulation seems appropriate for a predator whose own life has been defined by the patient application of crushing pressure to overcome resistance. My movement toward this final refuge requires tremendous effort as muscles that once generated crushing forces of over 90 pounds per square inch now struggle to propel my massive form through water that feels increasingly viscous and resistant. Each undulation of my body sends waves of exhaustion through neural pathways that have been firing constantly for a quarter century, and I recognize the metabolic crisis that signals the beginning of the dying process. The root system of the strangler fig creates a complex three-dimensional habitat where my body can rest supported by natural architecture that will maintain my position even as muscular control fails. The roots form a living cage that will protect my remains from scavengers during the initial stages of decomposition, while providing the structural support necessary for the final positioning that will determine how my atoms return to the ecosystem that sustained my life. My breathing becomes increasingly labored as respiratory muscles lose their coordination and efficiency, forcing longer intervals between surface visits that would normally maintain perfect blood oxygen levels. The carbon dioxide that accumulates in my bloodstream creates a narcotic effect that blurs the boundaries between consciousness and dream, allowing memories and present sensations to blend into a stream of experience that spans my entire existence. The chemical signature of approaching death triggers responses from throughout the aquatic ecosystem as scavengers begin to gather in response to stress hormones and metabolic byproducts that announce the impending availability of nutrients currently locked within my massive form. Catfish patrol the periphery of my resting place, while vultures appear in the canopy above, drawn by chemical signals that travel through both water and air to announce opportunity for those species specialized in recycling the dead. My digestive system begins to shut down as the energy required for maintaining complex biochemical processes is redirected toward essential neural and cardiac functions that will sustain consciousness for as long as possible. The partially digested caiman in my stomach will become part of the nutrient package that my death will deliver to the ecosystem, completing one final predatory transaction that transforms apex predator and prey into shared building blocks for future life. The territorial boundaries that defined my existence for decades become meaningless as the chemical signals of dying override the aggressive pheromones that once warned competitors away from prime hunting areas. Young anacondas and caimans approach closer than they would have dared during my healthy prime, reading the biochemical messages that announce the approaching end of a territorial reign that has shaped local predator hierarchies for over a decade. My thermal regulation fails, as cellular metabolism can no longer generate sufficient heat to maintain optimal body temperature in the cooling water. The temperature differential between my body and the surrounding environment begins to equalize through the same physical processes that will eventually return all my accumulated biomass to the universal pool of organic matter that sustains river ecosystem function. The sensory systems that once provided perfect environmental awareness gradually shut down as neural energy is conserved for the most essential brain functions. My chemical perception fades first, eliminating the constant stream of molecular information that once created detailed maps of prey, predators, and territorial boundaries. Vision becomes intermittent as optical processing requires energy that is no longer available for non-essential functions. My heartbeat slows to irregular rhythms as cardiac muscle exhausted by millions of cycles begins to fail in its role as the central pump for my massive circulatory system. Each contraction becomes more labored and less effective, reducing oxygen delivery to tissues that respond by shutting down non-essential functions in a cascade of physiological shutdown that follows patterns programmed by millions of years of vertebrate evolution. The consciousness that once focused with laser intensity on hunting, territorial defense, and reproduction now drifts in the liminal space between being and non-being, awareness flickering like a candle flame in wind as neural activity becomes sporadic and unpredictable. Memories surface randomly from decades of stored experience, creating a final mental symphony that encompasses everything from first successful hunts to the birth of offspring who carry my genetic legacy into an uncertain future. The immune system that once fought off countless infections and parasites begins to fail as white blood cell production ceases and existing antibodies are metabolized for their protein content. Bacterial populations that were once held in check by active immune responses begin to proliferate, starting the decomposition process that will eventually return my organized tissues to the simple molecules from which they were originally constructed. My body position settles into the final configuration that will determine how decomposition proceeds and which scavengers will have access to different portions of my remains. The strangler fig roots cradle my form in a way that will allow controlled access for aquatic decomposers while protecting against complete disruption of the decomposition process by large scavengers whose feeding activities might scatter nutrients beyond the localized area where they can most benefit the tree that will serve as my monument. The last coordinated movements of my life involve subtle adjustments to optimize the final resting position for maximum ecological benefit, an instinctive behavior that ensures my death will contribute most effectively to the continued health of the ecosystem that sustained my quarter-century existence. Even in dying, the apex predator serves the larger community of life through the careful placement of resources that will feed countless smaller organisms. Neural activity becomes increasingly sporadic as brain cells deprived of oxygen begin the irreversible shutdown that marks the transition from living organism to biological material awaiting recycling. The electrical storms that once processed sensory information and coordinated predatory responses fade to occasional flickers as consciousness dissolves back into the universal field of potential from which it originally emerged. My final breath creates a small disturbance on the water surface that spreads outward in concentric circles, carrying the last molecular signature of my individual existence into the broader chemical environment of the river. This final exhalation releases the carbon dioxide accumulated from a lifetime of respiration, returning atmospheric gases to the environment while ending the gas exchange that sustained consciousness for 25 years. The transition from apex predator to ecosystem resource occurs gradually as cellular structures lose their organizational integrity and begin the transformation back into simple compounds that can be utilized by bacteria, fungi, and other decomposer organisms. Death becomes not an ending but a change of state, converting complex biological organization into the building blocks that will support future generations of river life. In the sheltered cathedral created by strangler fig roots, my body begins its final service to the ecosystem that provided everything necessary for a successful predatory existence. The nutrients locked within my tissues will feed countless organisms, while the calcium in my bones will strengthen the shells of mollusks and the scales of fish. Even in death, the anaconda continues to shape the community of life that depends on the careful recycling of biological resources through the eternal cycles of growth, death, and renewal. Carbon cycle life made new in river mud. The bacterial pioneers arrive within hours of my final breath, drawn by chemical signals that announce the availability of complex organic molecules ready for decomposition. These microscopic recyclers begin their work on my external surfaces, breaking down skin cells and scale material into simpler compounds that can be absorbed and metabolized by the growing community of decomposer organisms that will dismantle my physical form over the coming months. My muscle tissue, once capable of generating crushing forces that could subdue prey twice my size, becomes a protein buffet for specialized bacteria that produce enzymes capable of breaking peptide bonds and releasing amino acids into the surrounding water. These freed amino acids become building blocks for countless smaller organisms, from single-celled protozoans to the filter-feeding invertebrates that form the base of the aquatic food web. The strangler fig roots that cradle my remains respond to the increased nutrient availability with accelerated growth, their living tissue incorporating nitrogen from my decomposing proteins and phosphorus from my dissolving bones into new cellular structures. The tree that serves as my final resting place becomes a direct beneficiary of the nutrient pulse created by my death, transforming anaconda biomass into root growth that will support photosynthesis and reproduction for decades to come. Within the first week of decomposition, my body becomes a localized ecosystem supporting hundreds of species of bacteria, fungi, and invertebrates that specialize in processing dead organic matter. Each species occupies a specific niche in the decomposition process, from the initial breakdown of soft tissues to the final dissolution of bone calcium that will take months to complete. This decomposer community represents one of nature's most efficient recycling systems, ensuring that no usable organic matter goes to waste. The aquatic environment accelerates decomposition through constant water movement that carries away dissolved nutrients while bringing fresh oxygen to support the aerobic bacteria that drive the most efficient breakdown processes. My body becomes a nutrient distribution center, slowly releasing the accumulated biomass of 25 years of successful predation into the water column, where it can be utilized by organisms throughout the local food web. Catfish arrive as the primary vertebrate scavengers, their barbels probing my decomposing tissues for accessible protein, while their feeding activities break up large tissue masses into smaller fragments that can be processed more efficiently by bacterial communities. These fish serve as mechanical digesters, transforming solid anaconda tissue into partially processed organic matter that becomes more readily available to smaller decomposer organisms. The calcium phosphate matrix of my skeleton dissolves gradually in the slightly acidic water, releasing mineral nutrients that are immediately absorbed by aquatic plants, struggling to grow in the nutrient-poor conditions typical of tropical river systems. My bones become a slow-release fertilizer that will support plant growth for months, with each dissolved mineral atom eventually incorporated into photosynthetic tissues that convert sunlight into biological energy. My liver, repository for fat-soluble vitamins and trace elements accumulated over decades of feeding, becomes a particularly rich source of micronutrients that are often limiting factors in aquatic ecosystem productivity. The gradual release of these stored compounds creates localized areas of enhanced biological activity as organisms respond to the temporary abundance of essential nutrients normally available only in trace quantities. The decomposition process creates distinct chemical gradients in the water around my remains, with different areas showing elevated concentrations of nitrogen compounds, phosphorus, potassium, and trace metals. These nutrient gradients attract different assemblages of organisms, creating a spatial mosaic of enhanced biological activity that extends the ecological impact of my death well beyond the immediate location of my body. Aquatic plants respond to the nutrient pulse with increased photosynthetic activity and accelerated growth, their leaves becoming greener and more numerous as nitrogen uptake enhances chlorophyll production. The oxygen released by this enhanced photosynthesis improves conditions for fish and other organisms throughout the local area, creating positive feedback loops that amplify the ecosystem benefits of efficient nutrient recycling. The carbon atoms that once formed the complex molecules of my body begin their journey through the carbon cycle, with some being incorporated into bacterial biomass, others released as carbon dioxide through decomposer respiration, and still others becoming part of the dissolved organic carbon pool that supports aquatic productivity throughout the river system. Each carbon atom carries the potential to become part of countless future organisms as it cycles through the ecosystem. Freshwater mussels and other filter-feeding organisms benefit from the increased concentration of organic particles created by decomposition. Their feeding activities, removing suspended organic matter from the water column while concentrating nutrients in their tissues. These filter feeders serve as nutrient pumps, processing large volumes of water and concentrating decomposition products into forms that can be utilized by higher trophic levels. The fungal networks that colonize my remains create microscopic highways for nutrient transport, moving decomposition products throughout the sediment and root zone where they can be accessed by plants and other organisms far from the immediate decomposition site. These fungal networks represent one of nature's most sophisticated distribution systems, ensuring efficient allocation of recycled nutrients throughout the local ecosystem. My skin, with its complex array of sensory organs and chemical receptors, decomposes into compounds that provide essential fatty acids and membrane components for organisms that lack the ability to synthesize these complex molecules themselves. The specialized tissues that once gave me perfect environmental awareness become building blocks for sensory systems in countless smaller organisms. The trace elements accumulated in my tissues over decades of feeding become available to organisms that might otherwise suffer from mineral deficiencies, with my decomposing body serving as a mineral supplement that enhances health and reproductive success throughout the local biological community. Iron from my blood, zinc from my scales, and copper from my liver all become available for incorporation into essential enzymes and metabolic cofactors. Seasonal flooding will eventually carry some of my dissolved nutrients downstream, distributing the legacy of my existence throughout the broader watershed, where they will support biological productivity in areas far from my final resting place. This nutrient export represents the ultimate expression of ecological connectivity, with the death of one organism enhancing life processes throughout an entire river system. The nitrogen cycle accelerates in the sediments surrounding my remains as bacterial communities specialized in nitrogen fixation and transformation process the protein-rich decomposition products into forms that can be utilized by primary producers. The enhanced nitrogen availability creates conditions for increased algal growth that supports herbivorous fish and invertebrates throughout the local food web. Within 6 months, the recognizable form of my body has been transformed into a rich organic layer in the sediment beneath the strangler fig, creating a permanent soil enhancement that will support plant growth for years to come. The physical structure that once embodied the peak of aquatic predatory evolution has become the foundation for a thriving community of decomposer organisms and the plants they nourish. The chemical elements that comprised my body continue their eternal journey through the ecosystem, some becoming incorporated into the tissues of fish that will eventually be consumed by future anacondas, others supporting the growth of vegetation that will provide habitat for prey species, and still others remaining in the sediment as a lasting memorial to 25 years of successful predatory existence. In the rich mud beneath the strangler fig, the atomic legacy of an apex predator becomes the foundation for new life, demonstrating the fundamental unity of all biological existence and the elegant efficiency of ecosystems that waste nothing while transforming death into the raw materials for continued evolution and adaptation. Eternal current anaconda perspective, then fade. The individual awareness that once focused through eyes like amber jewels has dissolved back into the vast consciousness of the river itself, but the patterns of memory and instinct remain, flowing like invisible currents through the water that connects all life in this ancient system. I exist now not as a single organism, but as part of the eternal anaconda presence that has shaped these waters for 40 million years. My accumulated experience becoming part of the species' knowledge that guides each new generation of predators born into these fertile channels. The strangler fig that holds my remains has grown larger and stronger, its root system enriched by the nutrients that once powered crushing coils and patient hunts. In its branches, toucans nest and feed their young on fruits that carry trace elements from my decomposed body, while beneath its spreading crown, new anacondas learn the hunting techniques that I perfected through decades of trial and error. The tree has become a living monument to the interconnectedness that defines all existence in the river ecosystem. Young anacondas glide through the same channels where I once hunted, their bodies reading chemical trails and pressure waves with senses inherited from countless generations of successful predators. Some carry genetic sequences that originated in my own DNA, passed down through offspring who survived their vulnerable first years to become territorial adults in their own right. The skills that ensured my survival for 25 years have become part of the collective anaconda wisdom that enables continued success in an ever-changing environment. The river remembers everything, carrying in its currents the molecular signatures of every life that has ever existed within its embrace. My chemical essence mingles with that of prey animals I consumed, predators I defeated, and mates who shared brief but intense reproductive encounters in the shallow waters, where life perpetuates itself according to patterns older than human civilization. Each drop of water holds memory, Each current carries the accumulated experience of millions of years of evolutionary refinement. The seasonal cycles continue their eternal rhythm, bringing flood and drought, abundance and scarcity, birth and death in patterns that have sustained river ecosystems since the continents took their current form. New generations of anacondas learn to read these patterns through instincts encoded in their DNA, while accumulated cultural knowledge passes from successful hunters to young predators through observation and imitation of proven techniques. The human presence in these waters grows stronger with each passing year, bringing new challenges that require adaptive responses from apex predators whose evolutionary programming prepared them for natural threats, but not for industrial fishing nets, habitat destruction, and climate change. The anaconda mind must learn to navigate these unprecedented challenges while maintaining the core behaviors that have ensured species survival through countless environmental upheavals. Future anacondas will face decisions that I never had to consider, as the pristine river ecosystem of my youth gives way to an environment increasingly modified by human activity. Their success will depend on the behavioral flexibility that allows apex predators to adapt hunting strategies, territorial behaviors, and reproductive cycles to changing conditions while maintaining the essential characteristics that define anaconda existence. The water continues its journey toward distant oceans, carrying nutrients released by my decomposition to coastal areas where they will support marine productivity, and eventual upwelling that returns minerals to terrestrial ecosystems. The carbon atoms that once formed my scales and muscle tissue begin their next phase of the eternal cycle, some becoming part of phytoplankton in oceanic waters, others incorporated into the shells of deep-sea organisms that will eventually settle into sediments, destined to become land again through geological processes. Dreams, if they can be called that, ripple through the collective anaconda consciousness that spans from the headwaters of mountain streams to the brackish marshes where rivers meet the sea. These dreams carry visions of perfect hunts, successful reproductions, and territorial dominance that inspire young predators while providing behavioral templates that guide successful adaptation to environmental challenges. The electromagnetic fields generated by living organisms create interference patterns in the water that form a kind of biological internet, carrying information between individuals and across generations through mechanisms that science is only beginning to understand. My contribution to this information matrix includes the neural pathways that encoded 25 years of successful predatory behavior, patterns that will influence anaconda behavior for decades to come. Temperature, pH, dissolved oxygen, and mineral content fluctuate through ranges that define the boundaries of anaconda existence, with successful reproduction and survival dependent on maintaining these parameters within narrow tolerances. Climate change threatens to push some of these variables beyond historical ranges, requiring behavioral adaptations that build on the accumulated wisdom of species survival while developing responses to completely novel environmental conditions. The acoustic environment of the river carries the calls of countless species, from the ultrasonic clicks of dolphins to the infrasonic vibrations of large fish, creating a symphony of biological communication that includes the pressure waves generated by swimming anacondas. Each acoustic signature contributes to the complex information matrix that allows ecosystem-wide coordination of feeding, reproduction, and territorial behaviors. Genetic diversity within anaconda populations represents the accumulated wisdom of millions of successful reproductive events, with each new combination of chromosomes creating the potential for individuals capable of surviving environmental conditions that might challenge existing behavioral repertoires. The genetic legacy I contributed to this diversity carries forward the traits that enabled survival through multiple El Niño events, habitat changes, and human encroachment. The boundary between life and death becomes meaningless in the context of ecosystem function, where the atoms that comprise living organisms cycle endlessly through different forms of biological organization. My death represents not an ending but a transformation, converting organized anaconda tissue into the building blocks that will support countless future lives in the eternal dance of creation and dissolution that defines all existence. Consciousness itself may be more fundamental than individual organisms, manifesting through biological forms while maintaining continuity beyond the lifespan of any single creature. The awareness that once focused through my nervous system continues as part of the vast intelligence that emerges from the complex interactions between all living beings in the river ecosystem. The current flows toward an uncertain future where the survival of apex predators depends on their ability to adapt to unprecedented challenges while maintaining the essential characteristics that have enabled 40 million years of successful evolution. The Anaconda perspective includes patience on geological timescales, acceptance of natural cycles beyond individual control, and commitment to the behaviors that ensure species continuity regardless of environmental change. In the eternal flow of the river, individual identity merges with universal process, and the story of one anaconda becomes part of the larger narrative of life, adapting to an ever-changing planet. The water carries this story toward distant seas and eventual return to sky, where it will fall again as rain on mountains that will send it back toward the lowlands where new generations of predators will learn the ancient lessons of patience, power, and perfect adaptation to the environment that shapes all existence in these timeless waters. The current flows, the river remembers, and in the endless cycle of water seeking the sea, the anaconda perspective fades into the larger consciousness that connects all life in the eternal dance of becoming and being that has no beginning and knows no end.